The young girl looked at the middle-aged man beside her and said, "Dad, let's go. As for the tuition, I can figure something out myself." The man replied, "Who knows? Maybe my lucky charm really can bring good fortune." The girl said helplessly, "But that's just an old coin." Alicia examined the coin, its aged silver glinting faintly. Alicia looked up and asked the man, "Sir, who gave you this coin?" The middle-aged man answered, "A long time ago, I saved someone from drowning. This was the reward they gave me." Alicia asked, "That place, was it the Gallic Strait?" Then she murmured to herself, "Ah, just as I thought." The middle-aged man replied in surprise, "That's right. How did you know?" Alicia pushed the coin back toward him and said, "Take it back. I can't buy this." The young girl looked at the man and said, "See, I told you to keep it as a lucky charm." Alicia shouted, "No, don't keep it. Go to the auction house right now. You'll get far more money there than you would from a pawn shop." Looking at the reward notice in the newspaper, the man cried out, "What? 10 million gold." The middle-aged man and the young girl bowed with their luggage in hand. "Thank you so much. We're truly grateful." Alicia smiled and replied, "Take care. Please come again." At a nearby tea table, several noble ladies whispered among themselves. Just like the rumors said, this appraiser really is upright. Coming here was definitely the right choice. Alicia lifted her teacup and listened as they continued talking. One of the ladies said, "Her Highness the Princess, the commander of the Holy Knights, the bishop in charge of the archives, even Grand Duke Moro from the neighboring country. I heard all the important people come here." Alicia drank her tea, looking a little helpless. Another lady exclaimed, "My goodness, really? Then this pawn shop must have handled countless astonishing treasures." Alicia set down her cup and replied, "In a sense, yes." The ladies eagerly crowded around and asked, "Then, if they left anything here, could you show us?" Alicia waved her hand and explained with a laugh, "Haha, they do come here often, but actually, it's not for buying or selling things." The ladies asked in confusion, "Then do they just come and go? Aren't those people troublesome customers?" Alicia smiled and replied, "Troublesome?" Looking at them, she fell into thought. To explain how those people who looked like nothing but trouble ended up becoming customers of my pawn shop, we need to go back to the past. That's right, my name is Alicia, and I'm living my second life. In other words, I returned to the moment after I died in my previous life. In my first life, one day, I was living a peaceful life with my grandfather when young Alicia pushed open the door and shouted, "Grandpa!" Count Hugo paid a sudden visit. Young Alicia opened the door and saw two unfamiliar men sitting inside. She stopped in her tracks, looking lost. Count Hugo looked at Alicia and said, "So, you're Alicia. It's a pleasure to meet you. I'm Count Hugo, a distant relative of yours and your grandfather's." Alicia looked at the man calling himself a count, full of doubt. Grandfather had relatives who were nobles? She anxiously asked, "Where's Grandpa?" Count Hugo replied, "Don't worry. I've already sent him to a large hospital in the capital. I'll explain everything. Can you come over here?" Looking at the papers on the table, Alicia asked, "So, if I sign this, you'll cure Grandpa, right?" Her grandfather had come down with a rare and strange illness, one that gradually stole his memories away. Count Hugo said, "Yes. You understand that treating your grandfather's illness will require a great deal of time and money, don't you?" There was no clear cure for the disease. I could only stand by helplessly as grandfather slowly lost his memory. They said they would heal him, and in that moment, I thought I'd found saviors. Count Hugo took the document and said, "Here, you really are a good child." Alicia asked, "I've signed it. Can I go see Grandpa now?" Count Hugo looked at the papers in his hand and let out a faint scoff. Alicia asked in confusion, "Huh?" Count Hugo sneered, "Pfft, what are you talking about?" Alicia asked again, bewildered, "What do you mean?" Count Hugo raised the document and said, "You've already signed it. From now on, we'll take full responsibility for caring for your grandfather." A cold smile spread across his face as he continued, "And according to the terms of the contract, you must leave this empire immediately and never return." Just like that, overnight, I was driven out of my home and out of the empire. The days I barely managed to settle in the territory of Grand Duke Moro did not go smoothly. In a dark alley, Alicia collapsed to the ground. One thug kicked her body and asked, "Hey, is this woman dead?" Another thug looked at Alicia and said, "I only wanted that lousy necklace, and you had to be so stubborn." A whistle sounded in the distance. A passerby pointed into the alley and shouted, "Guards!" The thugs panicked. "Damn it, run." The two figures hurried out of the alley, leaving Alicia lying alone on the cold stone pavement. Old newspapers were scattered around her. As long as I believed grandfather could recover, I could endure every hardship of every day. Alicia weakly opened her eyes, clutching the necklace tightly in her hand. This was the only thing grandfather had left me. But then, a newspaper drifted down in front of her. Alicia forced herself up and looked at the article. It was her grandfather's obituary. It said that a close associate of Count Hugo had died of illness in a sanatorium. Alicia stared at the words in the paper. At the scene of fire in the slums near the imperial capital, an unidentified body was found. It was later confirmed to be Michel Piachetard Leonet, the former duke. It was shocking. The newspaper carried grandfather's photograph. The Leonet family has begun liquidating its assets, including the former duke's pawn shop. The inheritance process is proceeding smoothly. Grandfather had died, and in a slum fire, no less. Alicia looked at the newspaper as tears streamed from her eyes. Grandfather had once been a duke. That was why those people had never stopped targeting him. Foolish Alicia. Idiot Alicia. I was tricked by them without a shred of suspicion, and I lost grandfather. If only time could turn back once. Great world tree, how pitiful. Along with that stranger's whisper, I opened my eyes once again. Alicia looked around. This is my room. She flung off the blanket, jumped out of bed, and ran to the door. Grandpa! Grandpa! She shoved open the door and rushed into the living room. The old man, sitting in the armchair, was startled. Oh my, Alicia. She stopped and stared at the elderly man before her. Grandpa. The old man looked at Alicia with a slightly dazed expression. You. As he looked at her, his eyes gradually regained their light. The old man looked at Alicia and said, Child, you're shouting loud enough to make yourself hoarse. Was I supposed to be going somewhere? Alicia looked at the old man before her. It really was Grandpa. Grandpa, alive and real. She cried out, Grandpa! She threw herself into his arms and hugged him tightly. The old man was knocked backward and asked helplessly, Did you have a nightmare? This feeling, so real, it couldn't possibly be a dream. Alicia pressed herself tightly against her grandfather's chest. I really came back. Alicia raised her head and asked urgently, Grandpa, what's today's date? The old man froze. Alicia grabbed the calendar on the table. There were still 3 days left before that incident. Grandfather, the pawn shop, and my life. Alicia looked ahead. I will never let them take all this away again. First, Hugo. I'll start with you. 3 days later, Alicia stood in front of the pawn shop and lowered the awning. Footsteps came from the distance as 2 men walked toward her. Alicia looked ahead and said, They're here. Count Hugo stepped forward and asked, Are you Miss Alicia? Is Uncle Michel inside? Alicia stopped what she was doing and replied with a smile. Did you come to visit Grandpa from the hospital? Thank you. She pointed to the door behind her and continued, But the paint isn't dry yet, so let's talk at the table in the yard. Alicia led Count Hugo into the yard and blocked the doorway. Count Hugo spread out the documents in his hand and said, You understand, don't you? This is for your grandfather's treatment. You only need to sign here. Alicia took the pen and signed the document. All right. Then she set down the pen and pointed at the house. The paint still needs a little more time to dry completely. Please wait a moment before going in. Alicia turned and walked toward the back of the house. Count Hugo watched her retreating figure and laughed inwardly. What naive brat. She really doesn't understand this world at all. After a while, Count Hugo ordered his subordinate, Hey, go check inside the house. The subordinate moved to obey. Count Hugo looked at the document in his hand and suddenly froze. He stared at its contents and stopped moving. Then he shouted in horror, W, what is this? Looking at the papers in his hand, he yelled. The signature disappeared. He frantically flipped through the pages. As long as this transfer of rights contract was still here. He kept searching desperately and finally saw the additional clause clearly. Property attached. An old shack at number 42 outside the capital. This property is currently burdened by a mortgage loan. Applicable interest rate, 50. Remaining loan shark debt, 30 million gold. Count Hugo staggered backward and collapsed onto the bench. A loan shark debt, 30 million gold. His subordinate came running in a panic. See, Count, Michel isn't in the house. Count Hugo shrieked. What? A few days earlier, Alicia had walked into a moneylender's office and looked at the man behind the counter. I want to borrow 30 million gold using this house as collateral. Set the interest rate to the highest possible. The owner cried out in shock. $30 million? Are you joking right now? Alicia slammed a stack of papers heavily onto the counter. I don't have time to joke, and I don't have money either. She opened her handbag and dumped all the documents out. I need the money today. The owner looked at the papers on the table and tapped the desk. You know, only a madman would accept that kind of rate, right? Alicia looked at him steadily and replied, give me the maximum amount. A faint smile appeared on her face as she continued, because the one who will have to pay it back isn't me. The owner looked at the girl in front of him and chuckled. I don't know what you're planning, but you're one interesting little brat. He pulled out a contract and said, fine, sign here. Sunlight poured over the grand manor, and fountains danced in the courtyard. Everything looked peaceful and serene. A maid walked ahead, guiding Alicia. A private room has already been prepared for your grandfather. All treatment will be provided at the highest standard. Alicia stopped walking. There's one more thing. The patient's information must never be leaked to the outside world. Never. The maid nodded. Of course, we always protect the privacy of our contracted clients. We guard secrets as if we were guarding life itself. Please rest assured. Alicia stood by the window and looked at her grandfather lying in bed. You don't have to worry anymore, Grandpa. No one will ever hurt you again. That was how things unfolded. Count Hugo clenched the documents in his hand in fury. That damn bitch. His roar echoed across the empty field, startling a flock of birds into the air. Alicia stood by the window, looking outside. That bastard Hugo has probably realized something is wrong by now. I need to hurry and check on Grandpa's pawn shop. It's been a long time since I last went to Ash Street. In a grand palace, an adjutant reported to the man before him. We found traces of the mage who stole the sword. They were last seen on Ash Street. The man stood with his back to the adjutant in front of a huge floor-to-ceiling window. The adjutant continued, there's a pawn shop on Ash Street. Isn't that the perfect place to launder stolen goods? The man turned around, a cold smile on his face. Sitting at the table, Alicia opened her notebook. Written clearly inside were the goals she had to accomplish. First, reclaim the Leonette family. Uncover the reason behind her grandfather's broken engagement. Clear his disgrace and restore his reputation. Second, successfully run the pawn shop. It was grandfather's most beloved place and the truest reflection of who he was. I must rebuild it. Third, find a cure for grandfather. I must uncover the cause of his illness and obtain the proper medicine. Alicia closed the notebook, grasped the necklace at her chest, and whispered to herself, I can do this. Think about whose granddaughter I am. Standing at the shop entrance with a broom in hand, Alicia said, let's begin. She started cleaning the store, sweeping away dust, and wiping down the counters. She organized every corner. Looking at the papers in her hand, Alicia said, once this is done, the Real beginning starts. But a vivid red stamp had been pressed onto the document. Application rejected. Alicia stared at the return papers. What? I even prepared a business plan, a fund management proposal, and my appraiser certification. I made every preparation. The middle-aged woman sitting across from her replied coldly, anyone can prepare papers. A little girl like you wants to open a pawn shop on this street? You think the world is far too simple. Alicia shot back. I really am skilled at appraisal. Please don't judge me so casually without knowing anything about me. After hearing that, the middle-aged woman clasped her hands together and slapped them heavily on the table. Oh, then let me see what you can do. Show me, right in front of me. Alicia lowered her head, looked into her shoulder bag, and began taking out her appraisal tools. Alicia picked up a magnifying glass and carefully examined the sapphire ring. After a while, she set the ring down and said, for the first sapphire, the purchase price I would offer is 1.5 million gold. The middle-aged woman let out a cold laugh. I knew it. I bought this ring for 1.2 million gold. Considering appraisal value, you should offer around 60% of that, about 800,000 gold. The woman demanded angrily, 1.5 million gold? Do you think quoting a high price will flatter me? If you plan to run a business by buttering up customers like that, then get out right now. Alicia lowered her head and searched through her bag. The middle-aged woman slapped the table. Are you even listening to me? Alicia pulled out a newspaper. Found it. She spread the paper across the table and asked, ma'am, "Have you read today's newspaper?" The woman froze. "What?" Alicia pointed at the headline. "Yesterday, it was just announced that the Tursita mine has been completely exhausted. As its rarity increases, the price of this gemstone is going to skyrocket. I could have pretended not to know and bought it for 800,000 gold. But if you found out the truth later," Alicia looked at the woman and said, "you would never come to our pawn shop again." "Right." Alicia reached out and pointed at another jewelry box. "Oh, and that one is fake." The middle-aged woman stared at Alicia and asked, "Where's your proof?" Alicia picked up the appraisal certificate and said, "At first glance, it doesn't have the natural luster it should. And this certificate uses the format of the Ottman appraisal office, but that office shut down last year." Alicia pointed at the date on the certificate and continued, "But as you can see, the date on this certificate is recent. It's a forgery." The middle-aged woman looked at the document. Alicia went on, "This is a very common amateur trick." Holding the papers, she added, "You should leave the real sapphire at our pawn shop for consignment. Based on an appraisal value of 2.4 million gold, you can expect a return of over 2 million. The middle-aged woman let out a sigh and looked at Alicia. "I admit it, you came well prepared, Alicia." Alicia bowed slightly and replied, "A customer's trust will always be my top priority." The middle-aged woman picked up the stamp and said, "Very well. I approve the reopening of Leonette Pawn Shop." As the stamp came down with force, the operating permit for Leonette Pawn Shop was finally approved. Alicia stood at the entrance of the pawn shop, looked up at the bright sunlight, and smiled. After a busy day, Alicia slumped over the counter in exhaustion. Phew! The first day after reopening was even busier than I imagined. Looking at the bustling customers inside the shop, she marveled to herself. But the strategy had clearly worked. Customers murmured softly in front of the shelves. "There's so many beautiful things here. They even have treasures like this." Alicia looked at the exquisite merchandise. Without having to pay cash up front herself, she had been able to stock goods and display all kinds of high-quality items. "This is absolutely perfect." Alicia sprang to her feet and looked around the refreshed shop. If Grandpa knew, he'd definitely be happy. She stretched and suddenly stopped. "HM, why do I smell mint?" A low voice came from the shadows. "You look busy all day. Business must be good." Alicia froze in place, startled. "Has he been watching me this whole time?" Alicia turned around and looked toward the vague figure by the window. Since it was opening day, she asked, "Is there something I can help you with, sir?" Leaning deliberately against the doorway with a cigarette between his lips, Alt looked at Alicia and asked, "Are you the owner of this pawn shop?" He sized her up and thought to himself, "What is this? You look pretty easy to push around." Alicia replied, "Yes. As you can see, I'm the owner." Looking at the man before her, she felt something strange. The color of his eyes looked oddly mysterious. Alt blew out a cloud of smoke and stepped closer. "Do you deal in human trafficking too?" Alicia froze, then instinctively asked, "I'm sorry, what did you just say?" Alt looked at Alicia and said, "I want you to buy me." Alicia waved her hand. "We run a legitimate business. We don't deal in that sort of trade." Alicia turned away and said, "If there's nothing else you're looking for, I'm closing up now. Business hours are over." Alt stretched out his hand and blocked her way. "What I'm looking for is a sword. But I didn't see it on this floor." Alicia stopped and glanced toward the second floor. "Weapons are kept upstairs. Tell me exactly what kind you want, and I'll bring it down for you. That's the rule in this shop." Alt described it. "It's a one-handed sword with a diamond-shaped blade. The hilt is set with pearls and other gemstones. The edge shows signs of use." Alicia went behind the counter and wrote it down. "Understood. Any other distinguishing features?" Alt stepped up to the counter. "Yes. The most important detail is that the item I'm looking for is stolen property." Alicia froze. Looking at Alt, she placed a hand on the counter and said, "You've come to the wrong place. We don't deal in stolen goods." Alt stared at Alicia and asked, "You think you can tell?" "That's quite an impressive level of confidence." Alicia replied, "When an item comes in, we cross-check it twice or even 3 times using certificates, purchase receipts, and auction records. If an item doesn't have a certificate," Alicia continued, "for example, a doll or a book, then my conversation with the client is the clue. How they felt when they bought it, how much they cherished it, and why they want to pawn it instead of selling it outright. Those are all factors in judging it." Alt cut in coldly. "Anyone can make up a tragic story. What if those receipts, auction records, and certificates are all forged? Have you never considered the possibility of being deceived?" Alt bent down closer to Alicia. Avoiding his gaze, she replied, "Of course. I worry about that every day. But if you install 3 locks and a thief still breaks in, should the blame fall on the person who didn't install 4th? Alicia pointed at Alt and asked, or should it fall on the thief? If despite my best efforts, something I appraised is later proven to be stolen, I'll fully cooperate with the investigation. So, sir, once you catch that hypothetical thief, then I'll listen to your advice. Alicia quietly thought to herself, wait, now that I think about it, this strangely aggressive attitude toward pawn shops, that overbearing suspicion, and even mentioning human trafficking. Looking at Alt's back, Alicia suddenly felt an odd sense of déjà vu. Alicia spoke up. Excuse me, sir. Are you perhaps from the Principality of Moro? Alt stopped walking and turned his head toward her. Then he turned fully around and asked, why would you think that? Alicia replied, just a guess. I'd heard some rumors about what happened to pawn shops in the Principality of Moro. Alicia fell into memory. Actually, when I lived in the Principality of Moro in my previous life, this was something I discovered while looking for work at a pawn shop. At that time, an old man in a beret had said to Alicia, looking for work at a pawn shop? Forget it. Don't you know all the pawn shops have been shutting down lately? Alicia had asked, puzzled why. The old man explained, a few years ago, some lunatics used pawn shops to do all sorts of bad things. Smuggling, loan sharking, money laundering, even human trafficking. After that, pawn shops were declared illegal in the Principality of Moro. Alt suddenly stepped closer to Alicia, his expression dark. Who told you that story? Tell me. Where did you hear it? Looking at Alt, Alicia was inwardly startled. I just asked casually, why is he reacting so sharply? Could he have a guilty conscience? Alt stared at Alicia and asked, do you deal in human trafficking too? I'm looking for stolen goods. Looking at him, Alicia panicked inwardly. Wait, don't tell me. Could he be a criminal from the Principality of Moro? If he was testing me just now to see whether I'd become his accomplice, then what do I do? Alicia made up her mind. It was time to throw him out. Looking at Alt, she called out, sir. Alicia cupped her face and flashed a radiant smile. Could it be that you're interested in me? I'd Forza. What did you just say? With both hands under her chin, as though pink hearts were floating around her, Alicia said, this is really troubling. Could this be the legendary love at first sight? Alt stared at her in disbelief. No, how on earth did you reach that conclusion? Alicia pointed at him and said, sneaking in after closing when no one's around, and then asking me all those useless personal questions. Isn't it obvious? Alicia shook her head and said, even so, you can't have me all to yourself. As you can see, this face of mine is quite popular. Sadly for you, you're not the only one who's fallen under my spell. Alicia brushed back her long hair and put on a helpless expression. Still, I suppose I could give you a little special treatment. Smiling, she opened her hands and said, leave me your card. If that pearl-studded sword enters the shop through legal channels, I'll make sure to contact you first. Alt looked at the hand Alicia held out and sighed, then pulled a card from his coat. He shook his head and placed the card in Elisha's hand. Alicia accepted it and said, thank you. Alt turned and walked toward the door. From behind him, Alicia waved and called out, be careful on your way home, Alt. I know I'm beautiful, but you can't come see me every single day, okay? Alt stepped out the door, listening to her shout behind him, and felt an inexplicable irritation rise in his chest. Why am I so annoyed? Behind the counter, Alicia looked at the card in her hand. So his name is Alt. Resting her chin in her hand, she murmured softly, Alt, what a nice name. Ever, 1 year earlier, in the Principality of Moro, after a long pursuit, Ever had captured the arsonist alone. It had been a serial arson case no one else could solve. Soon after, Ever became one of the Principality's magical advisors. With his gentle disposition, Ever won the people's trust and gained a reputation worthy of his ability. Everyone trusted Ever. Until that day, he stole a sacred relic and vanished overnight without a trace. A subordinate standing before the desk reported that pawn shop owner, Count Hugo, inhaled the smoke and still confidently claimed he had never handled stolen goods. But that divine artifact compels the truth from anyone who inhales the smoke. Alt asked, then did we search the wrong pawn shop? Alt shook his head. Impossible. Our holy relic tracker reacted inside that pawn shop. We can be certain Ever went there. The subordinate said excitedly, I knew it. That pawn shop must be Ever's hiding place, a channel he uses for money laundering. Alt replied, exactly. He sank into thought. But if that's true, why was that woman's testimony also judged to be the truth? Alt raised a hand. I need to personally inspect the second floor. The doorbell rang as Alicia pushed the door open. Emma looked toward the entrance and said, welcome, kid. I've been waiting for you. Emma held a delicate wooden box in her hands. The thing you wanted? I've made it. Looking at Emma, Alicia exclaimed, Wow, as expected of you, Emma. How did you get holy water with such high purity? Emma opened the box, revealing 2 crystal-clear pendants inside. He replied, That's all thanks to my skill, kid. Looking at Alicia, Emma asked, By the way, who are you planning to use this worst memory spell on? Taking the wooden box, Alicia said, I have my reasons. Watching her turn and leave, Emma muttered, What a terrifying little brat. Holding the box, Alicia stepped out of the shop and calculated inwardly, Hugo, get ready. This time, you're the one who's going to cry. Pawn shop owner Count Hugo paced uneasily through the empty hall. Duke Alt is a meticulous man. He may be hiding somewhere, watching everything. Count Hugo stopped walking. But Michel is so ill. Surely he wouldn't come to the pawn shop in person. A servant hurried into the room and reported to the Count. My lord, Duke Alt isn't at the pawn shop. I've watched the place for days. I'm sure of it. Hearing this, the Count let out a breath of relief and wore a sinister smile. Really? That's excellent. Straightening his collar, he continued, I should use this opportunity to crush Alicia completely. He walked to the mirror and looked at himself. If I scare her a little, she'll obediently listen. Just then, the door was kicked open with a bang. Alicia stood in the middle of the hall and said, Oh my. Hello, Count. He strode forward aggressively. You know perfectly well why I'm here, you little swindler. Alicia replied, I don't understand what you mean. I'm sure there must be some misunderstanding. Why don't we have some tea and talk it over? Staring at the teacup Alicia offered him, the Count barked, Stop playing dumb. You drink it first. Alicia froze. I'm sorry. The Count sneered, What? If it's really just a fine cup of tea, you've got no reason to refuse, do you? Alicia picked up the cup and drank from it in front of him. The Count froze, letting out a startled sound. Alicia put the cup down and said, Last time, because I was entertaining a guest out on the street, I got thoroughly scolded. So this time, I specially prepared tea. The Count stiffened completely, unable to believe what he was seeing. In Alicia's mind, her master's figure appeared. Her master had once sternly taught her, Have I not taught you how to properly deal with customers? Didn't I tell you to always have teacups ready, so that if things go badly, you can splash the tea right in their face? Alicia looked at the Count and said, You did say something like that. The Count took a step back. Why you got scolded? Alicia lowered her head. I'm definitely going to get scolded again today. Because I'm too soft-hearted, I couldn't throw the tea in your face, Count. So instead, I had no choice but to drink it myself. The Count's face turned deathly pale, cold sweat running down his cheeks. In terror, he thought, Are you saying Uncle Michel knows what happened that day? I heard he was gravely ill, even bedridden. The more he thought, the more afraid he became. More importantly, she said she'd be scolded again today. Could Uncle Michel really be here? At that moment, heavy footsteps came from upstairs. The Count jerked his head up toward the staircase and cried out, WH, what is that? The heavy footsteps echoed from above, shaking the entire hall. Alicia looked at the Count and asked, What's wrong, Count? His face went pale. That sound, thud, thud, thud. It sounded as though some enormous being was drawing nearer. A young attendant hiding behind a wooden railing stared ahead in terror. The Count whipped his head toward the source of the sound. A tremendous crash rang out from the training yard as a burly warrior swung a great sword and sent an armored guard flying. The Count screamed, Who's there? Looking forward, he asked in a trembling voice, You Uncle Michel. Is he testing weapons right now? Alicia looked at him and said, You're shaking terribly. Are you all right? Inwardly, she thought, just as expected, Hugo's worst memory. Really his grandfather. Looking at Hugo, Alicia said, Grandfather has actually been eager to settle the score with you. I barely managed to stop him, so you're lucky you didn't run into him today. Hugo's face went white. In a trembling voice, he asked, What did you say? He's been eager to settle the score with me. Alicia continued, Yes. He was furious. He kept shouting, Until the forest of Klana is returned, I will never forgive that brat Hugo. Hugo collapsed to the floor in disbelief. You don't tell me. Over that useless painting. Just then, another huge crash came from upstairs, along with an angry shout. Who's there? Hugo let out a shriek and jumped in fright. Scrambling on all fours, he rushed toward the door and screamed, Tell Uncle Michel I'll return Forest of Klana to him immediately. I'll return it right away, please. Alicia waved and called goodbye then. Watching Hugo flee in a panic, she couldn't help laughing. Lowering her eyes to the pendant at her collarbone, she saw the magical tool Emma had made. Its scent caused the target to recall their worst memory and trigger their psychological trauma. This thing really works like a miracle cure. Emma, you're the best. Holding her teacup, Alicia mocked him inwardly. I knew that idiot wouldn't dare drink this tea. The cup I drank while talking to Hugo was actually holy water. Holy power can cancel out magic, and magic can cancel out holy power. They erase each other like opposing rubbers. However, high-purity holy water can erase magic one-sidedly. Looking at the emptied teacup, Alicia felt a little pained. High-purity holy water. That stuff is incredibly expensive. Rubbing her forehead, she sighed and said, I hope I won't need to use this kind of thing too often. Looking at the vial in her hand, Alicia added, Still, I'm glad I got it. Staring at the vial, she fell into thought. Because my worst memory is the one thing I least want to remember. In her mind, a wanted poster appeared bearing a man's portrait. It was a shadow she could never shake off. Night fell, and the full moon hung high in the sky. Alt crouched on the edge of a rooftop, looking down at the movement below. Then he dropped smoothly to the ground from the moonlit roof. With a black-gloved hand pressed against the door, Alt produced a faint metallic clicking sound. Standing in the moonlight with one hand resting on the sword at his waist, he said, Let's see how thorough those interrogation mages were. A faint ripple of magical power slid through the air, threading forward like a guiding strand. Following the trace, Alt came to the attic window and slipped inside. The wooden floor gave a faint creak as he crouched low, warily observing his surroundings. Alt landed lightly on the attic floor with only the slightest sound. Bundles of dried flowers hung from the ceiling, giving off a dim, eerie presence in the moonlight. He scanned the room. The attic was empty. There was nothing here that looked like Lugnos. Alt stepped forward, his boots thudding softly on the wooden boards. He lowered his eyes to his cufflink. The one set with a red gemstone showed no reaction at all. He murmured, No reaction from the cufflink either. So it's not here. Then that means it's on the first floor. Alt quickly descended the stairs, his cloak flaring behind him. He analyzed the implication in his mind. This means Lugnos, or Ever, who carries Lugnos's holy power on him, only stopped on the first floor. He entered the first floor hall and looked around the quiet interior. The fastest way would probably be to check the ledgers. Ever would never have come here without a reason. Alt walked toward the counter, about to search for clues, when a faint sound of friction came from underfoot. He stopped abruptly and looked sharply to the side. Alt's hand went to his sword hilt as he stared ahead, alert. In the dim light by the counter, a figure was slumped over the desk without moving. Alt thought in alarm. Has she fainted? He stepped closer to inspect and found Alicia resting her head on a thick ledger, breathing evenly. Looking at her, Alt thought helplessly, No, she's just asleep. Looking at the defenseless sleeping girl, he muttered, honestly, using the ledger as a pillow. This really is top-tier security strategy. A trace of exasperated amusement appeared on his face. Then he noticed several slips of paper scattered on the desk, notes apparently left for him. Good morning. This is the second floor. If you come down to the first floor, the kitchen is directly below. Go straight to the kitchen. Don't wander around anywhere else. I know you're naturally suspicious, so you actually did exactly as I expected. Clap, clap, clap. Now open the cabinet with this note on it. The color looks a little strange, but you still have to drink it. After that, check the drawer on the right. There's a gift for you inside. Alt opened the drawer and found a pink note inside with a candy drawing on it. It's Candy Ambassador. Looking at these bizarre, childish messages, Alt's expression deepened. Inwardly, he said to himself, I was wrong. Standing by the table with the note in hand, Alt heard a nightmare-stricken murmur from Alicia. Don't take me away. Please, no. He lowered his head and looked at the girl, trapped in a nightmare, his expression turning grave. In her sleep, Alicia murmured softly, Grandpa. Holding the note, Alt turned away. Looking at the clues in his hand, he fell into thought. The next morning, behind the shop counter, Alicia stretched lazily. Last night's dream was a complete mess. Was it because of that awful memory spell? Even though I already drank holy water. Alicia looked ahead in confusion. Why is this here? This should be in the attic. Pinching a flower petal between her fingertips, Alicia muttered, Looks like I still didn't clean thoroughly enough. She was looking down, organizing the heavy books on the counter, when the crisp sound of the bell at the entrance rang. Alicia immediately raised her head, put on a professional smile, and called out, Welcome. A figure dressed in a black hooded cloak entered the shop. The visitor was completely concealed beneath a loose black robe and silently stopped in front of the counter. Alicia looked at the mysterious person before her. Is that a real person? Or the Grim Reaper? She swallowed nervously. Could it be that my return disrupted the natural order? So they've come for me? Standing before the counter, the visitor hesitantly asked, T, this is a pawn shop, right? Alicia let out a breath of relief and smiled. Yes, it is. Inwardly, she rejoiced. Thank goodness, just an ordinary person. The visitor continued, if I bring something in, can you appraise it for me? As Alicia straightened the cloth on the counter, she answered briskly, of course. What did you bring? You can set it here first. The visitor stretched out a hand from beneath the black cloak. Delicate lace cuffs showed at the wrist, and in her palm rested a piece of jewelry. It was a pendant set with an enormous blue-green gemstone that shone brilliantly under the light. Looking at the pendant on the counter, Alicia thought, how much is this thing even worth? She studied the blue-green gemstone carefully, noting its sacred radiance. Wait, could this be a holy relic? Alicia looked up at the visitor and asked, Miss, do you have an appraisal certificate or warranty? The visitor replied softly, I don't have anything like that. Alicia pressed further. Then a receipt or auction record? The visitor seemed uneasy. I'm not really sure. She clutched the edge of her cloak tighter and tighter, her voice growing smaller. I only have the gemstone itself. Is that not enough? Looking at the visitor in front of her, Alicia thought, could this be stolen? Alicia shook her head. I may not be able to appraise an object accurately right away, but I'm very good at reading people. I don't think this was stolen. Alicia picked up the teapot and poured a cup of tea for the visitor seated opposite her. If it were stolen, she'd be trying every possible way to get rid of it as quickly as she could. But this girl first asked me to appraise it. Alicia pushed the teacup toward the visitor and asked, so then, what's the story behind this gemstone? Cradling the teacup with both hands, the visitor replied softly, it's a pendant my mother left me. When I first received it, I was truly happy. Alicia observed her carefully. Judging by the tailoring of that dress and the ring on her finger, she must come from a very prominent family. Could she be in urgent need of cash? The visitor continued, but they're trying to take it from me. Alicia asked in surprise, what? Who's trying to take it? The visitor's body trembled slightly as she replied in a low voice, my uncle. He said a child like me has no right to possess something like this. That's why I came here. I heard you could leave valuables in a pawn shop for safekeeping. Alicia answered awkwardly, Miss, this isn't an institution that specializes in storage services. The visitor cut her off. I know this gemstone can be sold. Alicia asked in surprise, what? If this is something so rare and meaningful, why would you give it up? The visitor replied softly, I just need to make sure it is completely out of my uncle's control. Alicia looked at the girl in front of her. She was clutching her sleeve tightly, her fingertips stiff with tension. The visitor, in a low voice, she said, I'm too weak. He'll definitely take it from me, especially if I leave it with you. When you find someone truly worthy of this gem, please sell it to them. Anyone who can afford it must have the money and power to protect it. Alicia listened in silence, then spoke. Miss, Alicia looked at her, her gaze turning firm. I won't accept that arrangement. The visitor froze, then asked helplessly, then, what am I supposed to do now? Alicia looked at her and said, how could I possibly sell something so genuine? Alicia lifted a magnifying glass and carefully examined the pendant. Emeralds are very fragile. Even the slightest bump leaves permanent marks. She lowered the magnifying glass, pointed at the stone, and continued, but look at this. This pendant is flawless. There isn't even a single scratch. Alicia smiled at the visitor. No one treasures this gem the way you do. She took the woman's hand and said gently, so, just as you always have, I want you to keep protecting it. The visitor replied in a trembling voice, but if I keep it, my uncle will definitely steal it from me. Alicia looked at her and said, I can't help you sell it, but I can lend you money using this gem as collateral. The visitor asked in surprise, you mean, you'll keep it safe for me? Alicia shook her head. We don't simply store valuables for customers. The visitor fell silent for a moment, then seemed to make up her mind. Then I'll take out a loan with it as collateral. She looked up at Alicia and asked, how much can I borrow? Alicia held out one finger and pressed it against a gold coin on the counter. 1 gold coin. The visitor stared, stunned. Alicia went on, the term is 3 months, with 10% interest. Then she added with a bright smile, but since the amount is so small, I'll waive the interest. Looking at the woman, Alicia warned her, so you absolutely must come back and redeem it. I mean that. The visitor clenched the coin tightly in both hands and nodded hard. Yes, I'll definitely come back and repay the debt. Alicia opened the ledger and picked up a quill. Since it's collateral, I need to record it. May I have your name? After a brief silence, the visitor answered softly, Lena. My name is Lena. Alicia paused her pen, looked up at her, and said, All right, Lena. Alicia escorted her to the door and waved goodbye. We'll see each other again soon. Standing in the doorway, the visitor replied, Yes. Goodbye. Lena pulled her cloak tight and left the shop. Alicia returned to the counter and picked up the blue-green pendant. It truly was an exquisite piece of jewelry, and a holy relic at that. Gazing at the gem glowing in her hand, she thought, the reason I only lent her a single gold coin against an item worth a fortune was because... To Lena, this gem was an immeasurable treasure beyond all price. Alicia placed the gem into a wooden box. She closed the lid. Outside, rain began to fall, streaking down the window panes. The street was empty. Standing by the window and looking out, Alicia sighed. Not a single customer. Just then, a figure in a white cloak appeared through the rain, heading toward the shop. Watching the figure approach, Alicia said, Oh, a customer. She immediately turned and ran back to the counter, thinking excitedly, Is this person here for me? The bell rang. Alicia hurried forward and called out loudly, Welcome. The one who pushed open the door was Crescens, dressed in a white hooded cloak. He stopped at the entrance and looked at Alicia. Smiling, he said, Ah, you must be Michelle's granddaughter. Alicia looked at him in surprise. Crescens continued, You look exactly like Michelle. Alicia asked, puzzled, You think I look like my grandfather? Crescens laughed. I recognized you at once. Michelle used to talk about you often. He stepped closer and asked lightly, But why did you hesitate just now? Crescens walked inside. This cold is getting into my bones. I can come in, can't I? He took off his winter hat, revealing light gray curls, and brushed back his rain-damp hair. Where has Michelle disappeared to? Alicia looked at him and answered, He left the shop to me. He's traveling now. Looking at Crescens, she added, If you have business, you can discuss it directly with me. Crescens smiled. So you're already capable of appraising things? He extended a hand and placed an item on the counter. Leaning in toward Alicia, Crescens asked, Wait a second. Did Michelle never mention me to you? Alicia stepped back and replied, If you tell me your name, I could check the records. Crescens gave a soft chuckle. That won't be necessary. My name doesn't appear in any ledger. He let the smile fade and searched his clothes as he spoke. More importantly, take a look at this. Alicia looked at the box and asked, Do you have a certificate, a receipt, or auction records? Crescens pressed a hand over the box and replied, None of those. Alicia looked puzzled. Did you make it yourself? Or was it a private commission piece? Crescens answered firmly, Absolutely not. Alicia looked at him and said, I suppose the way you came by this item isn't something you can share either? Crescens replied, as if it were obvious, That's right. Why? Alicia stared at him and said, Because this is a holy relic. Crescens visibly jolted. He looked surprised. As Alicia watched the man before her, she thought to herself, This guy is a thief. He actually had the nerve to walk into my shop carrying a stolen holy relic in broad daylight. Slapping the table, Alicia demanded, How did you know this was a holy relic? Crescens shot back. Is that really what matters right now? Pointing at him, Alicia shouted, Where did you steal it from? Crescens raised both hands. I didn't steal it, and I'm asking how you knew it was a holy relic. I can tell just by looking at it. Holding the item, Alicia snapped. In any case, stay right there and don't move. Pressing a hand to the box on the table, she said, I'm reporting this to the temple right now. Crescens turned and ran for the door. Alicia shouted after him, Hey! Crescens burst out of the shop and disappeared into the street. From beyond the bar door, he shouted to Alicia, I didn't steal it. I'm not a thief. Then he added, Well, maybe some thieves would say that too. Alicia chased him to the doorway and shot back. Do thieves usually admit they're thieves? She pulled out a small spray bottle and walked toward the bar door. Crescens stood outside, watching her approach. Through the bars, Alicia shouted, A thief is a thief, no matter what. Standing outside, Crescens protested, I really am not a thief. I know you've probably misunderstood. She pressed the sprayer, sending a mist straight toward his face. Crescens got hit full on, but Alicia suddenly screamed, Ah! The wind blew the spray back at her. Clutching her eyes, she cried out in tears, Damn thief. Crescens shouted. Now's not the time to talk. I'll explain later. Grabbing the barred door, Alicia yelled, What do you mean later? Get back here. Crescens ran off, while Alicia leaned against the bars. Crying out, she wailed, I'm going to lose my mind. Slumping to the shop floor, Alicia muttered, Since it's come to this, I should just close up and rest for today. From a distance, Crescens waved and shouted, My name is Crescens. I'll be back. Lying over the table in tears, Alicia shouted, Back? Don't ever come back. She rummaged through the shop. The holy water was around here somewhere. She pulled out a spray bottle. Found it. Closing her eyes, Alicia sprayed it into them and sighed. Thank heavens. Tilting her head back, Alicia muttered, At least this expensive stuff finally came in handy when it mattered. She walked to the bar door and looked in the direction Crescens had gone. That damn thief. Next time I see him, I won't let him off so easily. Alicia tossed the spray bottle in her hand into a box. This one's no good anymore. I'll have to get another magical security device. At the end of the long street stood a magnificent temple. A figure in a white cloak moved through its corridor. Wearing his white cloak, Crescens walked down the temple hall. The attendants on either side bowed their heads as he passed through the crowd toward the great doors deeper inside. Crescens set the gold box he had brought back onto a table and thought to himself, how did she recognize it as a holy relic at a glance? Even Michelle can't identify one with the naked eye. Crescens paused. I heard he has a granddaughter. Standing at the counter, he had once asked, What kind of person is she? Can she really be trusted to inherit that pawn shop? Standing behind the counter, Michelle had replied, If that child takes over the pawn shop, there will only be two possible outcomes. Looking at Crescens, he continued, either total ruin or extraordinary success. Now, walking down the temple corridor and recalling what had happened at the pawn shop, Crescens let out a quiet laugh. That was certainly extraordinary just now. So he was only half right. Looking out the window, he murmured, I'd like to know which it will be in the end, failure or success. A clergyman approached and bowed. Bishop Crescens, the meeting is about to begin. Crescens stopped and replied, All right, I'll be there shortly. Bishop Crescens turned and headed toward the meeting chamber. His splendid cloak swayed as he moved. Standing in the temple's holy light, he lowered his gaze to the exquisite golden reliquary on the table and said softly, I'll be back very soon. Until then, a playful smile appeared on Crescens's lips. Speaking to himself, he said, I'm looking forward to seeing which it is, failure or success. The next day, Alicia walked through the town carrying a heavy suitcase. She stopped and looked ahead. Carrying her suitcase, Alicia entered a luxurious hall. Her leather shoes rang sharply against the polished floor. A female attendant noticed her and hurried over to block her path. I'm sorry, miss. That area is reserved for VIPs. Alicia stopped and answered, I know. The attendant looked troubled. Then why are you? Alicia looked at her and said, Do I not look like a noblewoman or a wealthy person at first glance? She took a letter from her coat and held it up in front of the attendant. I'm here on behalf of Count Michel Lionnet to conduct business. Tucking the letter away, Alicia headed straight for the VIP section. I'm going in now. Seated behind his desk, Hugo looked at his visitor and asked, Welcome. What brings you here today? Standing in front of the desk, Alicia rubbed her eyes and said, I want to review Michel Lionet's account. Hugo looked a little uneasy and asked cautiously, If you don't mind my asking, what is your relationship to Count Michel Lionnet? Alicia replied, I'm a relative. Hugo shook his head. Even relatives can't simply view his account whenever they please. Alicia opened her case and took out some documents. Exactly. That's why I came prepared. She pressed the papers onto the desk and continued. Just like those bastards did when they inspected my grandfather's assets. I have a signed authorization letter from Michel Lionnet himself, as well as a recording device containing his statement of authorization. Alicia thought to herself, Count Hugo, you're the one who suggested and authorized me to do this, right? Hugo said, That's right. I did say that. I've confirmed it, so please wait a moment. As Alicia watched him turn away to fetch the records, she continued thinking, I only put a little pressure on Hugo because he was too scared to bring these out. But grandfather would never authorize those bastards to inspect his assets. That had to be forged or an impersonation. They really were bold. Hugo returned and placed a file on the desk. If you wish to withdraw any funds you'll need to bring your seal. Looking at the documents, Alicia replied, that's all right. I'm only here to review the account today. She carefully read the figures on the statement, her brow furrowing. There's less money in the account than I expected, but there are many records of large sums moving in and out. Although the depositors are all different, the corners of Alicia's mouth lifted slightly. She thought to herself, he must have been helping Viscountess Rosanna. She placed a hand over the statement and examined the listed branch locations more closely. These branches are all very close together. That means there must be a place nearby where large sums of money are changing hands. Closing the file, Alicia smiled at the bank clerk. I've finished reading. Thank you. She picked up her suitcase and turned to leave, already forming a plan in her mind. I've decided on my next destination. Walking out of the bank, Alicia looked into the distance. The Philosophy Auction House. There happens to be a night auction tonight. Maybe I should go set a trap. The auction hall was crowded, full of elegantly dressed nobles chatting in small groups. Alicia entered and looked around, thinking they said there would be guards at the entrance. She looked ahead and noticed a tall figure from behind. Ah, is that him? Alicia walked over and lightly tugged at the hem of the man's black coat. Excuse me, is the entrance. But this way, the man in black stopped and turned to look at her. The moment Alicia saw his face, she froze. Inwardly, she gasped her. Looking at him in surprise, she realized it's that customer from before. Oh, it's you. Art asked, what are you doing here? Alicia replied, is this a place I'm not allowed to come? Don't tell me you live here. Art looked at Alicia and said, don't be ridiculous. Who lives in an auction house? Alicia replied, well, some people do live in pawn shops. Art asked, you mean you live in that pawn shop? Alicia answered, yes. Art continued, do other people know? For example, your family? Alicia said, who knows? They probably have no idea at all. More precisely, they can't be allowed to know. My grandfather would break down. Looking at Art, Alicia asked, besides, is living in a pawn shop really that miserable? Art looked at her in silence. Alicia smiled. You seem very curious about me, but I have something important to take care of. Lifting her case, Alicia said, I'll be going on ahead. She glanced around the hall. The auction is about to start. If I don't hurry inside, that works too. Wearing a mask, Art looked at Alicia and said, I have business here as well. Once you're done, let's talk. After saying that, Art turned and walked away. Alicia watched his back and hurried off in another direction. Alicia thought, talk after I'm done? Have I already become immune to his greasy lines? Art stopped and said, don't flatter yourself into thinking I'm curious about you or interested in you. Alicia stood there in surprise, then let out a soft laugh. Thank goodness. Looks like I'm not immune to that kind of line after all. Art turned around and asked, by the way, do you know your eyes are bloodshot? Alicia asked in surprise, what? Turning his face slightly away, Art said, you should see an eye doctor. After saying that, Art headed toward the main doors, where two guards stood watch. Looking at his back, Alicia thought, is he worried about me? Watching him go, she thought, that's exactly why people keep asking whether he's interested. A suited attendant came forward. Welcome, honored guest. Alicia looked at him. Smiling, the attendant asked, may I ask what business you have at the Philosophy Auction House? Alicia answered, I'm a seller. The attendant stepped aside and gestured politely. Then please come this way. Alicia followed after him, her boots clicking against the polished floor. Looking down the corridor ahead, she thought, so this is the route I should take. Alicia pushed open the heavy door. She entered an opulent reception room. Inside sat a noble woman in a purple gown, while an elderly man stood by the sofa speaking with her. On the other side, Art, wearing a mask decorated with purple patterns, stood leaning against the wall with his arms folded. Carrying her handbag, Alicia passed by Art. A masked man named Carlos called out, hey you. Alicia stopped and turned to look at him. Staring at her, Carlos said, yes you. Pointing to herself, Alicia asked, me? Carlos sneered. Do you even know what kind of place this is? Alicia asked, isn't this the waiting room for sellers at the Philosophy Auction House? Carlos replied, well, not exactly, but whatever. That's the problem with this place. If someone claims they've got something to sell, they let in any riffraff of unknown origin. Looking at him, Alicia thought, is an auction house supposed to judge people? It should be judging the items. Carlos continued, if you don't screen the people first, what's the point of inspecting the merchandise? Alicia repeated, screen the people? Carlos replied firmly, exactly. Who's to say the thing you brought isn't something you picked up off the street or stole? Looking at Carlos, Alicia thought, is he treating me like a thief? Says the man to a person who got herself pepper sprayed yesterday, trying to catch one. Smiling, Alicia said, then you should come during the day. Carlos asked what? Alicia continued, the daytime auctions are private. Only invited guests may attend. If you want to socialize with those so-called refined people, that's when you should come. She gave a slight smile. Or have you already been filtered out? Carlos shouted angrily, you little brat, pointing at Alicia. He yelled, do you even know who I am? A nobody like you dares speak to me like that? If I wanted, I could destroy the likes of you in an instant. At that moment, the door opened and an attendant stepped out. Next, please. Carlos let out a cold snort and walked into the room, with Alicia following close behind. Inside sat two men responsible for screening items. One of them said, please submit proof of ownership for your item, the receipt, and your calling card or identification. Standing in front of the desk, Alicia asked, this isn't my first time here. Are all those really necessary? Beside her, Carlos said loudly, Carlos Cordo. I'm sure I told you to remember my name. Inwardly, Alicia repeated it. Carlos Corto. Looking at the document in her hand, Alicia saw that it read, the Cordo family was granted the title of Baron in recognition of 3 years of loyalty to Duke Leonet. So he has ties to the Leonet family. If it says 3 years of loyalty, that means he should have already come to their attention by now. What exactly did he bring today? Then the appraiser's voice sounded out. An old book. Inspection complete. Alicia looked ahead and repeated softly, an old book. The door opened, and a suited man stepped out and said, next. Carrying her bag, Alicia headed for the door, thinking, according to the information I found, the book auction is scheduled after the paintings. She stepped into the room, her boots making crisp sounds on the corridor floor. Carlos Cordo, whatever you're planning, it won't go the way you want. Alicia entered the resplendent auction hall, brightly lit, where guests were already taking their seats one after another. She looked around for her target. There he is, wearing a mask. Carlos sat arrogantly in one of the cushioned front row seats. Alicia walked down the steps, her boots making steady sounds against the red carpet. She headed straight for a seat behind Carlos. She sat down in a corner of the hall and stared at Carlos in front of her. Sensing her gaze, Carlos turned and gave a cold snort. Stare all you like. As Alicia kept watching him, she suddenly noticed Carlos's expression change. His whole body tensed in his seat. A tall figure then approached Alicia and sat directly beside her in the empty seat. Confused, she thought, why is he reacting like that all of a sudden? Alicia looked at him in surprise. What? Without taking his eyes off the front, Art said, watch the auction. Alicia turned toward him and asked, there are plenty of empty seats. Why sit here? Art did not answer. At that moment, a blond man stepped onto the auction stage and bowed to the guests below. Good evening. I'm Frederick, tonight's auctioneer. Our first lot is a rough ruby, said to have been mined 100 years ago. An attendant in white gloves carefully displayed the enormous ruby resting on a tray. A murmur spread through the hall at once. The auctioneer, Frederick, then gestured toward a painting on stage. The next lot is a work from a private collection titled Spirit of Kelowna. Painted 25 years ago by a now-deceased anonymous artist, it depicts a forest in the northwest. An attendant removed the white cloth covering the canvas, revealing a finely painted forest scene in muted yellowish tones. Frederick continued, there's a thumb-sized crack in the lower left corner of the painting. The guests began whispering among themselves. A landscape painting like that isn't exactly rare, is it? And it's damaged too. Who would buy something like that? Alicia sat quietly in her seat, watching the painting. Frederick announced, the starting bid is 100 million gold coins. The corners of Alicia's lips lifted slightly. Beside her, Art turned and asked, is that the item you submitted? Alicia replied, yes. Looking at the painting on stage, Art said, it's obviously destined to go unsold. Why would you set such an absurd opening price as 100 million gold? Alicia leaned close to Art's ear and whispered, because my intention is for that painting to remain unsold. Art replied, I see. So your real target is something even bigger than 100 million gold. Looking ahead, Art said, that tactic reminds me of someone. Alicia replied, sharp guess. Looking at him, she asked, but who would that someone be? Art gestured toward the front. I told you to watch ahead. Alicia turned back. All right. On stage, the auctioneer announced, next we will begin the auction of rare books and ancient manuscripts. He continued, our first lot is an unpublished work by the sociologist Auguste. Looking at the stage, Alicia said, finally. She turned her gaze to the side. So that's the item he submitted. The auctioneer, Continued. Interpretation of Power, containing handwritten notes by the author. The opening bid is 200,000 gold. Hannah suddenly jumped to her feet and gasped, "My goodness!" People around her all turned to look. Realizing her mistake, Hannah sat back down and said in a low voice, saw thee. Sitting beside her, Alicia looked at Hannah in confusion. What? Carlos wore a meaningful smile. Looking at Carlos, Alicia thought, she's been staring at that person the whole time. She sank into thought, and that title, I've heard it somewhere before. Then Alicia suddenly remembered. That book was about to be designated a banned book. She recalled an article she had once read. I remember being confused at the time. It was an unpublished work, and yet, that there was already a report saying it had been banned. Alicia kept thinking. More importantly, the civil servant who possessed the book was even dismissed. That person's name was. Sitting in her seat, Alicia heard the auctioneer's voice echo through the hall. The bid has increased by 100,000 gold. The current price is now 800,000. Looking at Hannah, Alicia thought Rosanna pulled strings behind the scenes to get that person fired. Rosanna must know Hannah will want that book no matter what. But with that man following her around, winning the bid won't be easy. Alicia suddenly froze. She whipped her head around. I'm sure that man. Staring at the tip of Carlos's shoe, Alicia realized he's sending signals to that person to drive up the price. On the other side of the hall, a bidder wearing a monocle was receiving the instructions. Alicia watched Carlos's movements carefully. The sole of that shoe, that must have some kind of transmitter built into it. One tap of Carlos's toe means bid immediately. 2 taps in succession means pretend to hesitate, to drag things out. The auctioneer loudly declared the current bid is 900,000 gold. Watching this scene, Alicia thought they're going to fire Hannah anyway. Right now, they're just trying to squeeze the very last coin out of her. Looking ahead, Alicia thought, I can't let Hannah get that book. She kept considering it. Is there any way to dump that book onto those people and expose what they're really trying to do? Then an idea struck her. I've got it. Turning her head, she looked at Art beside her. Sensing her gaze, Art looked at her in confusion. Alicia reached out and tugged on his sleeve. Excuse me. Leaning close to his ear, Alicia whispered, Sir, how much would it cost to rent you for an hour? Art froze. What? Alicia hurried on. Didn't you tell me last time to buy your time? So how much for 1 hour? Art replied, No, that was... Alicia cut him off. I don't have time to argue. Just send the bill to the shop later. Leaning even closer, she whispered, See that man over there holding number 80? He's receiving signals by transmitter from the gentleman on my right. They're trying to force that book on a number 80 at an outrageous price. Alicia continued, I'll deal with the transmitter. You make sure bidder number 80 can't get away. Art asked what? Looking at Alicia, he continued, Even if bidder 80 buys the book at an absurd price, you lose nothing. So why do you want to stop it? Alicia replied, He's innocent, and he's about to be swindled by a fraud. Even if it doesn't benefit me, I should still help. Art looked at Alicia in silence. She stared back at him. Is he really not going to help? Finally, Art said, All right, I'll help. Art turned his head toward Alicia. On stage, the auctioneer shouted, 6 million gold. Alicia gasped. It's gone up that much already? She leaned close to Art's ear and urged him in a low voice. Hurry. Art rose from his seat and quickly left. Alicia watched him go, then lowered her head and searched through her bag. I left my self-defense magic tools behind, but from her bag, Alicia pulled out a bottle. I still have this bottle of holy water. Looking over the crowd, the auctioneer said, If no one wishes to bid further, I will close the bidding after the count of 3. Sitting in her seat, Hannah clutched her skirt and her paddle tightly in both hands, visibly conflicted. The auctioneer began the countdown. 3, 2. Hannah abruptly thrust up her paddle, marked number 80. Watching this, Alicia thought, next Carlos will tap twice with the tip of his shoe to signal him to stop bidding. Carlos's lips curled into a wicked smile. He lifted his foot, the toe lightly touching toward the floor. His toe hovered in the air, just about to tap the second signal. Alicia seized the moment. Now, she suddenly flung the bottle in her hand toward the floor. It shattered at Carlos's feet, and blue liquid splashed everywhere. Carlos's shoe landed on the wet floor. He froze and said, What? Carlos sprang to his feet. No. Looking toward the auction stage, he shouted, You can't. The auctioneer continued on stage. The bidding will close after the count of 3. The count begins now. 3. Carlos reached out as if to stop him. The auctioneer continued. 2. The man holding paddle number 80 kept his paddle raised, still waiting for a signal. The auctioneer, called out the final count. 1. The hammer came down with a sharp crack. The auctioneer declared, "Interpretation of power has been sold to bidder number 80 for 8,500,000 gold." Carlos froze where he stood as cold sweat streamed down his face. Then he clutched his head and let out a shrill scream. "I told you not to." Bidder number 80 turned to look at Carlos in confusion. Carlos collapsed into his chair, covering his face tightly with both hands. Then a voice spoke from behind him. "Excuse me, sir." 3 burly guards blocked his path. The lead guard said expressionlessly, "There are a few things we need to verify. Please return to your seat and remain there." Looking at the guards, Carlos seemed completely at a loss. The guard continued, "We've received a report. Seeing that things had gone bad, the man holding paddle 80 prepared to slip away quietly. He had only gone a few steps from his seat when Art appeared behind him. Pressing a hand onto the man's shoulder, Art said, "Right here." The man was so startled, he collapsed to the floor. Pinning him there, Art said, "Just as I thought. There's something here." From behind the man's ear, he removed a tiny device. A guard stepped forward and said, "Thank you. Not only did you report this, you personally caught him as well." Art handed the device to the guard. Then he turned and walked away. Hannah chased after him and accidentally bumped into his back. "Ow!" Looking at Art, Hannah said, "Thank you so much. This is my first time at an auction house. I came because there was a book I really wanted to bid on." Still shaken, she continued, "I never imagined I'd run into a scam like this." Art looked at Hannah and said, "You shouldn't thank me. There was someone else who helped you too." Hannah asked in confusion, "Huh? Who?" Art gestured to the side. "Over there." He turned toward where she had been sitting, but the seat was already empty. Alicia had vanished without a trace. Walking alone down the empty steps, Art took a business card from his coat and looked at the writing on it. Hannah had said to him, "If you find out who helped me, please contact me. I want to thank that person in person." Looking in the direction Alicia had gone, Art thought, where on earth did she disappear to so suddenly? "I came here specifically to see her today." Walking alone along the corridor, Art had originally thought that woman had shown up to sell Legrano. But now it seemed she had come purely for the auction. She looked so naive, she almost got deceived herself. Even though there was nothing in it for her, she still wanted to help someone who was about to be swindled. Art stopped walking. "I really can't see her as Eve's accomplice." No, it's still too soon to conclude that. Eve also worked hard for months once, just to win people's goodwill. Pressing a hand to his chest, Art thought, and that clasp is still glowing. Looking at the long sword in his hand, he thought, even if she didn't personally hide Legrano, she must still be connected to this somehow. Moonlight blanketed the quiet estate. Art pushed open the heavy doors and entered the brightly lit interior. An attendant came forward and asked, "You've returned, sir?" Walking inside, Art replied, "I didn't find anything unusual at the auction house." The attendant followed after him and asked, "Then why did you do that? Did some new information come in?" Art stopped walking and said, "No, there's been no news from Morrow." The attendant asked in confusion. Then, Art went to a table and pressed a hand to its surface, deep in thought. The attendant, standing beside the table, said, "Didn't you leave a business card-shaped magic tool at the pawn shop before?" Art looked at the round sensor disc on the table. The attendant continued, "Up until now, there had been no reaction at all. But when I checked it today, the sensor on the table suddenly emitted faint static. I could vaguely hear crying through it. What should I do? What am I supposed to do?" Judging by the timing, it came through before the auction started. But all we heard was Carlos crying, and then the signal abruptly cut off. "You didn't see that woman today? Could something have happened to her? Or did she run into some kind of trouble?" Art fell silent in thought. He recalled what Alicia had looked like. Now that I think about it, her eyes did seem a little red. Had she been crying? Pressing a hand to his forehead, he said, "I'm not sure." Sitting at the table, he was overcome with deep self-reproach. I asked her countless questions, but not once did I ask whether she was doing all right. Sunlight poured over the grand palace-like building. The auction house director slapped the document onto the desk and said, "Since you've signed it, from this moment on you are banned from entering our auction house." Looking at the document, Carlos went limp in his chair. He staggered out of the hall in a daze, lamenting under his breath. "This is a complete disaster. What am I supposed to do now?" Walking alone along a path on the estate grounds, he noticed an ornate carriage parked by the roadside. Carlos stopped and looked at it in confusion. Before he could react, 2 men suddenly rushed out from the shadows. One of them quickly clamped a hand over his mouth and hoisted him up. All Carlos could do was let out muffled whimpers as he was dragged by force into the darkness. Carlos was shoved into the carriage, which raced off through the night. He was then roughly pushed into a room and fell heavily onto a thick carpet with a muffled groan. A woman in a red dress sat in the seat of honor, looking down at the man on the floor. "I've heard about the mess you caused." Carlos raised his head, cold sweat running down his face. Looking at the woman before him, he trembled uncontrollably. The woman in red sat with her legs crossed, staring at him coldly. The attendants by her side stood with their heads lowered. Carlos knelt on the floor, not daring to meet her eyes. Then the woman in red rose and stepped on Carlos's back. "I had thought Hugo was already enough of a disappointment. Do you have any idea how much you've cost me?" Lying face down on the floor, Carlos begged, "I'm sorry, Viscountess. It really was an accident. How could I have known that magic device would suddenly fail? And I swear, I never mentioned your name, my lady." The woman in red looked down at him coldly. Through tears, Carlos continued, "That idiot taking orders from me was a complete fool too. And there was that strange woman who antagonized me. Most importantly, that bizarre painting with the starting bid of 100 million gold that didn't sell made the whole atmosphere in the auction hall far too frenzied. I couldn't control it at all." The woman's expression changed. "Wait." Staring at Carlos, she asked, "That painting with the starting price of 100 million that didn't sell, what painting was it?" Sweating coldly, Carlos replied, "It was a painting called Forest of Colonia." The woman in red's expression changed dramatically, and she sprang to her feet. Carlos, terrified, collapsed backward on the floor and stared at her. Coldly, the woman ordered, "Get out." Carlos froze for a moment, then answered repeatedly, "Yes, I understand." He scrambled out of the room in a panic and practically dove into the carriage. The carriage door slammed shut, and then it sped away into the night. Looking out the window, the woman in red said, "I had meant to leave a few errands to you, but you truly are a hopeless fool. You couldn't even get rid of that nuisance, Eve. As for that idiot, I'll decide later what to do with him." Turning her head, she called Hugo. Hugo flinched in surprise. He looked at the woman in red. With a faint sneer, she said, "The painting you gave your uncle opened at 100 million gold at the auction. What do you make of that?" Hugo replied, sweating coldly, "But didn't they say that painting couldn't be sold? Anyway, it's not the kind of painting anyone would buy, so it should be fine, right?" The woman in the red dress glanced to the side and asked, "Do you think Uncle Michel's goal was to make money by selling that painting? If, as you said, it's a painting that could never be sold in the first place, then why would he still put it up for auction?" With a grave expression, the woman in the red dress said, "That was definitely a signal." Hugo froze. "A signal?" She continued, "That's right. A signal meant for someone. Most likely a kind of code. The moment the accomplice who received the signal bought that painting, the code would be complete. If he set the price at 100 million gold, then whatever is hidden in that painting must be worth just as much. Maybe it's the location of a hidden fortune." Hugo covered his mouth in horror, cold sweat running down his face. The woman in the red dress gave a greedy, cold smile. "That painting depicts the true leaf forest in the northwest. Maybe he buried his wealth there." Hugo waved his hands frantically. "I don't know. If it was that important, then we can't even get the painting back now. What are we supposed to do?" He cried out in panic. "Philosophy. The auction house security is the best in the empire." The woman in the red dress sighed. "Hugo," she stared at him and asked, "Have you forgotten how I make my money?" Hugo's face turned pale. In disbelief, he asked, "Sister, are you planning to?" The woman in the red dress answered coldly, "That's right. The forgery of Forest of Colonia is already prepared." She looked at the forest painting, a dark gleam flashing in her eyes. "Uncle really is a troublesome man, especially since he shoved that woman out to the very front." Hugo said cautiously, Sister, that girl really does seem like she doesn't know anything." The woman in the red dress said icily, "I don't care whether that bitch knows anything or not." She sat back down, folding her arms over her chest. "If Uncle doesn't intend to show himself willingly, then I'll have to drag him out by force." Hugo looked at her and asked, "How are you going to do that?" The woman in the red dress gave a chilling smile. "Let's just make that pawn shop disappear completely. That way, there won't be any more of those annoying complications, and Uncle won't be able to keep hiding." The door to the pharmacy opened. Eliza walked in and said, "Hello, doctor." From behind the counter, the doctor replied, "Welcome, Miss Eliza." He set a basket of herbs on the counter and said, "I prepared the herbs you needed in advance." Eliza took the basket. "Thank you, doctor. I'm troubling you again, as always." Looking at him, she continued, "When I asked other doctors about my grandfather's illness, they all said they didn't know the cause. I felt completely lost then." Eliza stood on the street, in front of a shop marked with a cross. Looking at the letter in her hand, she thought, is this the last one? She hesitated at the entrance. If this place also tells me to bring my grandfather in person, or says they don't know the cause, then I'll have to search for a doctor in another region. Eliza pushed open the door. She stepped inside. The doctor, seated behind the counter, looked up and said, "Welcome. How may I?" Once he saw who it was, he stopped moving. Eliza looked at him and asked, "I'm looking for a doctor named Stefan Trenchio." Seeing that he remained silent, she asked, "Did I come to the wrong place?" The doctor snapped back to himself and replied, "Ah, no. I'm Stefan Trenchio. I just suddenly remembered something I'd forgotten." The doctor sat back down and asked, "So what brings you here today?" Eliza sat down in front of the desk and said, "Well, my grandfather is very ill." Looking at the letter in her hand, she continued, "He wasn't like this before, but now he's become extremely weak, and without any warning, there are times when he suddenly doesn't recognize people." The doctor wrote on a sheet of paper and asked, "How long have these symptoms been appearing?" Eliza replied, "I think about 6 months. As far as I know, he hasn't suffered any injury to the head." The doctor fell into thought. Then he looked at Eliza and asked, "Didn't the patient come with you?" Eliza lowered her head. "Yes, because of certain circumstances." Looking at the letter in her hand, she continued, "It's hard to make a diagnosis based only on my description, right?" The doctor smiled. "No, I think I already have a rough idea." "What illness this is?" Eliza asked in surprise. "Really?" The doctor nodded. "Yes, I've read records before about patients with similar symptoms." He opened a book on the desk and continued, "If it's sudden memory loss accompanied by physical weakness." He picked up a dark blue book and said, "I suspect it may be a rare disease called Mendax." Eliza repeated heavily, "Mendax." The doctor explained, "As far as is known, this illness is caused by long-term exposure to a certain specific toxin. However, its incubation period is very long, so that it's difficult to determine the exact cause." Eliza asked urgently, "But there is a treatment, right?" The doctor replied, "Yes, though calling it a cure may be a bit too much. Snow mint root, boiled and administered in measured doses, should help relieve the symptoms. However, because this is such a rare disease, no complete cure has been found yet. And since I haven't seen the patient with my own eyes, prescribing these herbs carries the risk of side effects." Eliza fell silent for a moment. Then she looked at the doctor and said, "Even so, please prescribe them for me." She asked, "If something goes wrong, we could just stop taking them, right?" The doctor wrote on the paper as he answered, "Yes. If you truly think that's fine." Eliza lowered her head and thought, "It's okay. If I don't at least do this much, I'll never find a way to cure grandfather." She smiled and said, "Thanks to you, doctor, I feel like I can finally breathe again." Holding the basket, she continued, "Since they said grandfather's condition is improving, then the herbs. That must be working." The doctor nodded. "I see. That's wonderful." As if suddenly remembering something, Eliza asked, "Ah, right. Has anyone come asking about me? About my grandfather?" The doctor smiled and replied, "Of course not. And I remember telling anyone who asked that your visit, Miss Eliza. That was for your own health." Eliza blinked playfully and said, "If possible, please make it the name of a disease that sounds a little complicated." The doctor laughed. "All right, I'll do that." Carrying the basket full of herbs, Eliza headed for the door. "Then, I should be going now." The pharmacy door opened and shut. Standing behind the counter, the doctor watched the direction Eliza had left. The smile on his face gradually disappeared. He stood silently in front of the medicine cabinet, his expression turning grave. Sunlight poured over the streets of the town, and Eliza's figure vanished into the distant buildings. As Eliza walked down the street, she thought, "I already sent the snow mint root to the sanatorium. Should I go buy some new self-defense items too?" She pushed open the door to another shop and cheerfully greeted the figure behind the counter. "Hello, Emma." Emma set down the vial in her hand and smiled. "Are you here to buy more magical tools?" Eliza nodded. "Yes." Looking around the shop, she continued, "I need something that can instantly subdue an opponent, not just spray." She glanced around and thought, handcuffs or a whip might be nice too. Emma froze and stared at Eliza in surprise. Her expression turned a little strange. Clearing her throat, she said, "So, you're into that kind of thing?" Eliza hurriedly waved her hands. "And no, it's not like that. It's for self-defense. To protect myself." Emma looked at her and said, Sound like an excuse." Eliza replied helplessly, "I told you. It's really not like that." Eliza moved closer to the counter. "Oh, there's something else I wanted to ask you." Emma said, "Ask me." Eliza leaned closer and lowered her voice. Do mages have a guild? Like the Merchants Guild? Or an emergency contact network? Or maybe something like a Moda Alumni Association? Emma replied bluntly. There's absolutely no sense of unity among mages. A little disappointed, Eliza said, That's such a shame. There was a mage I wanted to find. Emma looked at Eliza, then gave a teasing smile. Oh, you want me to help you find some man you fell in love with at first sight? Is that it? Elisa protested loudly. Lowering her head a little awkwardly, she said, Actually, I don't know his name. I don't know what he looks like, either. I only know his magic circle. Emma clapped her hands. For a mage, a magic circle is basically their signature. If you know that, you don't need a name or face. She looked at Eliza and asked, What does it look like? Eliza took out a sheet of paper and handed it over. Here. Emma examined it carefully and said, Oh, you drew this well. A beetle, an olive tree, smoked coral, and a pomegranate. Looking at the design, Emma continued, That a very rare combination, so I should be able to find her. Eliza replied happily, Really? Thank you, Emma. Emma looked at Eliza and asked, But you're not a mage. How did you see her magic circle? Eliza smiled. I have my ways. Inwardly, she thought, I can't exactly tell her I saw it in a painting from my previous life. Emma looked at Eliza in confusion. Looking out the window, Eliza thought, If I can find that mage, I'll be able to reclaim Leonette. As she walked down the corridor, she thought, by now, news about the forest of Colonia should have reached Rosanna, since she still hasn't come looking for me. Eliza pushed open the door to her room and thought she must already have gotten a copy of that painting by now. She entered and shut the door behind her. But in the end, she'll have no choice but to buy the original. Eliza walked to the bookshelf and reached for a box on a high shelf. More importantly, why did Rosanna want to get rid of Hannah Jago? Her fingers touched the edge of the box. Rosanna even has a way to get involved with designated prohibited books. That's another problem. Eliza glanced aside, lost in thought. A voice came from outside the door. Excuse me, is anyone there? Startled by the sudden sound, Eliza answered, Ah, yes. Her foot slipped and she toppled backward. The heavy object from above came crashing down with her. Eliza cried out, Ah. The young woman who had come to visit asked worriedly, Are you all right? Rubbing her aching head, Eliza slowly rose from behind the counter, hissing in pain. She looked at the visitor and said, Yes. Welcome. How can I help you? Hannah looked especially excited. Delighted, she asked, Oh, do you remember me? Eliza froze for a moment and replied in confusion. Pardon? Hannah stepped closer and reminded her eagerly, You helped me at the auction house. Looking at her, Eliza gradually showed surprise. Hannah continued her introduction. I'm Hannah Jago. Please just call me Hannah. Inwardly, Eliza marveled. So she really is Hannah Jago. I searched everywhere and couldn't find her, and now she's walked right to me. Eliza smiled brightly, took Hannah's hand, and said, All right, Hannah, I'm looking forward to working with you. Steam curled up from the teacups. Hannah took a sip and said, Thank you for the tea. As Eliza looked at her, she thought to herself, Why did Rosanna want to drive this lady away? She looks completely harmless. Eliza asked, By the way, how did you find this place? Setting down her teacup, Hannah replied in some surprise, Oh, didn't you hear? With great enthusiasm, Hannah said, A very tall and rather frightening gentleman told me. Eliza froze, thinking, so it was him. But why would he do that? Hannah continued, That person happened to be near the scene at the time, so I tried to apologize to him. But he told me that the one who had really helped me was someone else. Then yesterday, he sent me a telegram telling me about this pawn shop. As soon as I heard, I immediately took leave and came here. A little embarrassed, Eliza replied, I didn't really do much. Still, I didn't expect you to take leave just to come here. Where do you work? Hannah said proudly, I'm an imperial archivist. I work at the archives. I started this job because I love books, so when I saw that book at the auction, but I almost went mad. Lifting her teacup, Eliza asked thoughtfully, Then I suppose you also manage prohibited books? Hannah replied excitedly, Yes, and that's exactly why coming here makes me even happier. The stains on that parchment binding cloth are beautiful, and over there, that glass paperweight looks like it would be so helpful for reading. Looking at her, Eliza thought to herself, She really is a book lover. Smiling, Eliza suggested, If you go down to the basement, we have some old books and documents there. Would you like to take a look? The two of them walked down the stairs, their footsteps echoing through the quiet corridor. Neatly arranged bookshelves lined both sides, filled with heavy tomes. Hannah looked around and let out heartfelt admiration. Wow! Following behind Eliza at a quick pace, Hannah said with a face full of adoration, "Boss, I think I'm in love with you." Eliza laughed lightly. Huh. Suddenly, Hannah stopped and cried out at what she saw ahead. "Oh my God." Pointing at a volume on the shelf, Hannah asked excitedly, "Boss, could you sell me this book?" Eliza smiled and replied, "Of course, though it is rather expensive." Hannah said without the slightest concern, "That's fine. Thanks to you, I saved 8.5 million gold, after all." Eliza took the book down and said softly, "All right then." Cradling the book, she blinked and added, "I'll throw in that glass paperweight you liked as a free gift." Hannah let out a delighted cry. Holding the books they had selected, the two returned to the stairs. Hannah asked eagerly, "Boss, do you need any help?" Walking behind Eliza, she enthusiastically advertised herself. "I'm actually very good at identifying forged documents and books, and that I also know how to restore old documents." Eliza stopped and asked, "You're good at identifying forgeries?" Hannah answered firmly, "Yes." As she wrapped the books, Eliza pressed on, "Then among the forgeries you've discovered recently, have any belonged to Viscountess Rosanna?" Hannah was shocked. "How did you know?" Eliza replied calmly, "So I was right." Pushing up her glasses, Hannah explained, she tried several times to embezzle budget funds using fake receipts. "I think her budget, that was cut in half because of me." Eliza looked incredulous. She wanted to fire someone over something like that? Eliza handed over the wrapped books. "Here you go." Hannah accepted the package happily. "Thank you very much, boss." Eliza's expression turned serious as she cautioned, "If you happen to receive any suspicious contact from that lady, could you let me know? After all, that Viscountess." Hannah nodded repeatedly and agreed readily. "Of course, no problem. Because, boss, you're someone I can trust." Holding the books tightly in her arms, she wore a smile of complete satisfaction. Hannah walked to the door, turned back, and waved goodbye. "I'll come again." Eliza stood in the shop and watched her leave. As the front door closed, the pawn shop fell quiet once more. Standing alone inside, Eliza thought to herself, "Having memories of my previous life is certainly useful, but I still need more current information. I need to understand the present situation better if I want to deal with Rosanna more easily." She looked at the iron box on the table, where several letters were neatly arranged. "Looks like I'll have to make a trip to the Intelligence Guild." Night fell, and the entire city was wrapped in deep blue darkness. Lights glowed in the distant buildings. Eliza stood before a magnificent building. Is this the Intelligence Guild? Looking at the tightly shut door, she thought, "I've only ever been to the one in the Principality of Moro before." She swallowed. Memories of the past surfaced in her mind. "I still remember the shock I felt when I pushed open that door for the first time." Eliza reached out and grasped the cold handle. "I wonder if the atmosphere here is the same." As the door slowly opened, lights spilled out. Eliza stood frozen in surprise and murmured softly, She pushed the door open wider, and the scene before her left her stunned. The room was warm and bright, nothing like the dark, sinister Intelligence Guild she had imagined. "Hello." A clear voice rang out. Turning toward the sound, Eliza saw William standing on a ladder, holding a piece of white fabric. "Is this your first time here?" "Sorry, I'm changing the curtains for spring." A little orange and white kitten rubbed itself against Eliza's feet, purring contentedly. Eliza replied hesitantly, William jumped down from the ladder and turned to face her. Spreading his arms cheerfully, he asked, "What would you like to drink? Juice, tea, or milk?" Eliza answered a little uncertainly, "I'll have juice." William laughed heartily. "No problem. Please sit for a moment." He set a glass of orange-colored liquid on the table with a bright clink. "Here, orange juice." Pulling out a chair and sitting down, William looked at her and asked, "Why do you look so confused?" After settling into her seat, Eliza answered, "Well, I thought the Intelligence Guild would be a bit scarier." William scratched his head and smiled. "I know what you mean. A few years ago, this place really was pretty frightening." His expression suddenly turned a little dejected as he sighed. "But no customers came that way." Very quickly, he perked back up and spread his hands. "So, I just renovated the whole place." Eliza asked, "Did your revenue go up?" William froze completely, his expression going somewhat hollow. Helplessly, he replied, "Well, It seems the decor wasn't the real issue. Eliza said thoughtfully, maybe it's because the other employees are scarier than you. William repeated in confusion. The other members? Eliza added, I mean people like Alt. William froze, the smile instantly stiffening on his face. Hesitantly, he asked Alt, then he burst out laughing. Aw, you mean Alt. He does look a bit fierce. He only wears black every day, so people naturally think that he's intimidating. Eliza's expression turned serious as she moved to the main subject. Anyway, I came here today because I have 2 requests. William asked, 2? What are they? Eliza explained, first, I'd like you to introduce me to someone who can serve as an outside weapons consultant. My connections aren't very broad. William confirmed, so you're looking for a weapons expert. He fell into thought, resting his chin on his hand, and replied, at the moment, no one comes to mind immediately. If I think of someone suitable later, I'll contact you. Then he asked, and the other request? Eliza's expression grew serious. The second request is, after explaining everything, she stood to leave. Looking at William, she said, then I'll leave these 2 requests to you. William stood beside the table, watching her off with a stack of documents in his hand. No problem. Looking at Eliza's back, William asked, by the way, how has Mr. Michel been lately? Eliza stopped. She turned around with a smile and replied, he's doing very well, of course. Eliza pushed open the pawn shop door and walked inside. Head lowered, she moved forward and suddenly bumped into a solid chest. Rubbing her forehead at the sting of pain, Eliza looked up. Alt was standing there with his arms folded. You must have been busy today, too. So busy you don't even watch where you're going. Looking at the man before her, Eliza asked, why are you here? Did you know I'd come and wait here on purpose? Avoiding her gaze, Alt said, I'm a member of that guild. We just happened to run into each other. Eliza smiled. Is that so? Then I'll believe you. Alt asked in slight surprise. You'll believe me? Looking at him, Eliza thought, this guy really is just like the rumors say. He's always unexpected. She pulled her thoughts back together. Since he showed up there, he really does belong to that intelligence guild. Eliza turned and left, her footsteps echoing in the silent corridor. She suddenly looked back and found Alt following behind her. She quickened her pace, full of confusion and irritation. What? Why is he following me? So focused on looking back, Eliza failed to notice the obstacle underfoot. With a startled cry, she lost her balance. She fell to the ground. Sitting there and rubbing the sore spot, Eliza complained, ow, why is there something like this in the middle of the road? She looked up and realized she had run into a stone statue. A hand reached out in front of her. Alt was standing beside her. Extending his hand, he said, I told you before, watch where you're going. Eliza took his hand and got to her feet, protesting a little unwillingly. That's because you kept following me, isn't it? Turning away, Alt said, come on. Eliza froze. Where to? Isn't this the road back to your pawn shop? Without turning his head, Alt asked in return, if that's the case, then why are you still following me? Eliza was momentarily at a loss for words. Stammering, she asked, that's because. Alt replied calmly, I still have something to deal with. Tilting his head slightly toward her, he added, there's still something unsettled between us, isn't there? Eliza recalled what had happened before at the pawn shop. He had asked how much it would cost to borrow a customer for an hour. That account between them had never been settled. Suddenly understanding, Eliza said, right, we still haven't resolved that. Following behind Alt, she continued, just now I was thinking maybe that was why you kept following me. Walking ahead, Alt replied, you seem to have misunderstood something again. Don't worry, it's not what you think. Eliza asked in confusion, But I didn't say anything just now. Without looking back, Alt said, your face says everything you want to say. Did something happen? A little surprised, Eliza asked, are you asking me? Alt answered briefly, yes. I happened to glimpse your bag earlier. It was full of defensive magic tools. That's why I asked. Looking ahead, he continued, if something happens to someone who runs a shop, then as a member of the Intelligence Guild, I ought to know. Eliza looked away and answered, nothing happened. I just thought if I bought these defensive tools, they'd come in handy someday. Alt asked back, shouldn't you be hoping you'll never have to use those things? The two of them walked down the late-night street. Eliza replied, an enemy could appear at any time. Rather than regret not being prepared later, isn't it better to prepare in advance? Alt stopped walking and looked at Eliza seriously. Are you sure nothing really happened? Thinking for a moment, Eliza said, now that you mention it, something did happen. It was the day I ran into you at the auction house. I listened in silence. In his mind surfaced that day, when Milton had mentioned hearing crying. Eliza smiled and continued. That day, the ceiling on the top floor suddenly started leaking. I'd already spent a fortune having it repaired, but it still leaked, so I had to hurry and buy materials to fix it again. It was such a hassle, but now it's been repaired very solidly. Even if a typhoon came, it'd be fine. Alt suddenly stopped walking. Eliza looked at him in confusion. Sir, with a serious expression, Alt asked, is that pawn shop very important to you? Important enough that even the slightest problem would make you cry in sadness. A little dejected, Eliza answered, yes. Alt stood there silently, looking at him. Eliza felt that the mood now was somehow different from usual. It really does feel different. Sensing her gaze, Alt asked, why are you looking at me like that? Eliza replied, I was just wondering why. Did you stop walking? Alt started forward again. Let's go. He walked ahead, and Eliza followed behind. The two continued onward through the night. Looking at Alt's back, Eliza felt a strange sensation rise in her heart. One after the other, they walked the quiet streets and returned to the pawn shop. Alt pushed open the door and went inside. Then let's talk terms. Standing behind the counter, he tidied things as he continued. I asked William. The starting price for a simple request is 100,000 gold. For the matter at the auction house, including the success fee, how about a total of 200,000 gold? Alt stopped moving and looked at Eliza seriously. Before that, though, there's something else I want to say. The Intelligence Guild doesn't just deal with information. Eliza asked, puzzled, what? Looking at her, Alt explained, commission mediation, manpower brokerage. We handle those kind of services too. He looked at Eliza and said, if you need a bodyguard or security personnel, you can request that from us as well. Even something as minor as damage to your pawn shop ceiling can be commissioned. Eliza suddenly understood and laughed. So this is a sales pitch. She replied lightly, thank you. Next time the roof leaks, I'll contact you. Turning around, Alt asked, and what were you trying to request at the Intelligence Guild earlier? Walking over to the counter, Eliza answered, oh, nothing major. I just asked whether they could introduce me to someone knowledgeable about weapons, and also whether there have been any recent rumors in noble society. With her back to Alt, she continued, I pretended it was just to keep up with trends. Looking out the window, Eliza thought, for the pawn shop's business, I need to understand the trends among the nobility. But in reality, it's to monitor Rosanna's every move. If I openly investigate Rosanna, word will likely reach that woman's ears. Alt suddenly said, I'll take that request. Eliza turned around in surprise. You gonna tell me rumors from noble society? Alt denied it. Not that one. He moved closer to Eliza and continued. You said earlier that we should discuss compensation. My condition is simple. From now on, if you need consultation about weapons, you come only to me. Eliza smiled and said, are you looking for an excuse to come see me? Probably not. Looking at Alt, she thought, he really looks like he wants to see the weapon collection on the second floor. Or maybe he still doesn't believe I don't deal in stolen goods. Eliza replied, it's not a bad suggestion, but I refuse. Alt asked in surprise, what? Why? Eliza explained, even if each individual commission fee is limited, I'd still have to keep paying consultation fees, right? According to shop rules, consultation fees must be paid. In the long run, my losses would only keep growing. Looking at Alt, she said, you wouldn't work for me for free, would you? Like those people who have ulterior motives. She knew very well that refusing once first would make the negotiations afterward easier. Accepting the other party's proposal without question was foolish. Eliza continued, besides, I still don't know how capable you are. Alt repeated in a low voice, how capable I am. Eliza smiled and suggested, so let's try working together a few times first. If the results are satisfactory, then we can sign a formal contract. Alt gave a soft laugh. Folding his arms, he looked at Eliza and said, so in the end, you still insisted on setting conditions. After a brief pause, he nodded. Still, that shouldn't be a problem. Fine. Looking at Alt, Eliza thought he had agreed far more readily than expected. She had assumed he was the type with an extremely strong pride. The corners of Alt's mouth lifted slightly into a confident smile. I'm confident. He fixed his eyes on Eliza and continued firmly, you'll be satisfied. Alt added, I mean my skills. Eliza smiled in reply. Understand. She prepared to leave. If I need anything, I'll contact you again. Then I'll be going first. Alt stopped her. Wait. Looking at Eliza, he asked, your name. What is it? Eliza stopped and tilted her head at him. I thought you already knew. Alt asked back, why would I know? We've never introduced ourselves to each other. Eliza blinked playfully. You're a member of the Intelligence Guild. Do you want to hear me say it myself? Alt stared at her in silence, his expression cooling slightly. Seeing his reaction, Eliza thought to herself, wow, look at that face. I guess I shouldn't tease him too much. Smiling, Eliza said, Eliza, I'm Eliza. I nodded. Understood. He turned to leave, but Eliza called after him. Aren't you going to tell me your name? I already know what was written on the card, of course. Alt didn't stop walking. He walked straight outside. Suddenly, Eliza called out, wait. Alt stopped. Eliza smiled brilliantly and said, that white shirt, that looks good on you. She waved goodbye to him. Alt stood by the window, wearing that white shirt, the intricate tattoos clearly visible in the light. And the one taking the emperor's place was the regent of the Pre-Sleeve Empire. The emperor was not currently in the palace. Due to the immense grief brought on by the empress's death, he had decided to go on pilgrimage to the Holy Land to heal his wounded heart. Before his departure, the people mourned. The carriage procession slowly rolled away from the imperial palace. On both sides of the palace gates, attendants and maids stood solemnly in place. The heavy doors slowly opened, and golden light poured in. A red-haired man in magnificent regent's robes entered the grand hall, surrounded by attendants. He was the regent of the Pre-Sleeve Empire, Marquis Crottle. The attendants on either side bowed their heads in unison, paying their respects to His Highness the Regent. Marquis Crottle walked along the red carpet through the corridor, composed and imposing. Passing straight through the kneeling crowd, he headed deep into the hall. An elderly official stepped forward and gave a slight bow to Marquis Crottle. The official saluted him and said, thank you, Your Highness the Regent. There is actually a matter that requires your review today. Marquis Crottle stopped walking and said, today, for the first time in a long while, I had afternoon tea with some old friends. The official asked in confusion, pardon? Marquis Crottle continued. One Viscountess shared a rather troubling story. She said that certain unqualified people have been forging permits and selling unverified goods. A meaningful smile curled at the corners of his lips. After hearing that, I thought about it and realized that the format of our permits has not been changed in several hundred years. The official looked at Marquis Crottle and asked, do you intend to order a new permit format to be implemented? Marquis Crottle replied, yes, but at an extra condition. Permits may only be issued to those who have a guarantor. That way, even if those who run illegal shops flee, there will always be someone left behind for us to drag back and hang. Listening to him, the official's expression stiffened. Marquis Crottle continued, the guarantor must be a blood relative, or a noble whose status itself can serve as proof. Have the Imperial Holy Knights handle the inspections. Those people don't have anything particularly important to do these days anyway, do they? The official lowered his head. Igriegagis. Marquis Crottle gazed into the distance and said thoughtfully, as for where to begin. Yes, that place is ideal. Those filthy, the dark and dangerous gray streets of the capital. Inside a softly lit shop, a brown-haired woman asked in surprise, that stamp really sold for 800,000 gold? Eliza smiled and replied, of course it's sold. It was a stamp issued to commemorate His Majesty the Emperor's birthday, with only 1,000 ever released worldwide. She continued, you should have seen it. The collector's eyes were shining when he bought it. The brown-haired woman said happily, that thing had just been gathering dust in the warehouse. Bringing it here on consignment was such a wise decision. Looking at her, Eliza said, bring the other stamps next time too. There may be more treasures hidden among them. The brown-haired woman clasped her hands together. I definitely will. The brown-haired woman left in satisfaction. Watching her back, Eliza calculated inwardly. Since something worth 800,000 gold sold, my commission alone comes to a full 80,000 gold. Sitting at the desk with a feather pen in hand, Eliza recorded the pawn shop's income in the ledger. The pawn shop's earnings had already exceeded 30 million gold. She set down the pen and closed the ledger. Now all that remains is to keep this money growing. Maybe it's time to start investing. Eliza walked to the door and flipped the sign to the side that read closed. Then she picked up a broom and began sweeping the front entrance. A purple-haired woman poked her head through the crack in the door and asked, "Boss, are you closing this early today?" Eliza paused and replied, "Yes, but only for today." Smiling, she explained, "Today is the general meeting of the Gray Street merchants. It's to prepare for the upcoming festival." The purple-haired woman responded excitedly, "So today's the day? I'm really looking forward to the Gray Street festival." Eliza nodded. "Me too." The purple-haired woman waved goodbye. "Then I'll come again tomorrow." Eliza closed the shop door and stood alone behind it, thinking the festival, During the festival, the pawn shop doesn't really get much business. Holding the broom, she continued cleaning. "If that's the case, I only need to do one thing." Light gleamed in Eliza's eyes. That is, advertise the pawn shop to everyone attending the festival for free. She swung the broom energetically. "I've already thought of a way. If it goes well, the customer flow will definitely increase significantly." After finishing the cleaning, Eliza leaned on the broom, let out a breath, and smiled in satisfaction. The typewriter made a crisp clacking sound and spat out a blank sheet of paper. Looking at the white page, Eliza thought, since something's written on it, this must be from William. She picked up a bottle of spray. "If I spray this onto the paper." Eliza evenly sprayed the liquid across the page. Words gradually appeared on the paper. Looking at the revealed contents, Eliza said, "Done." She carefully read the information on the sheet. It clearly stated that the palace was issuing merchants a new format of permit. If the new regulations were not followed, shops would be forcibly shut down. The problem was that the grace period was extremely short, and there were rumors that Gray Street would be the first place where it would be strictly enforced. Looking at the intelligence in her hand, Eliza thought, this feels exactly the same as what happened with Hannah, maintaining the appearance of legality on the surface while plotting behind the scenes. And something like this could only be done with the involvement of people at the top. Eliza's expression darkened. Could Rosanna's target be my pawn shop? What trick is she playing now? Eliza sat before the typewriter, her fingers flying over the keys. In her reply to William, she wrote, "William, if you find out who is pushing this legal revision, please let me know quietly as well." Next came a message for Hannah. Eliza kept typing. "I heard that the format of merchant permits is being revised. If you know the specific format, could you tell me in advance?" Eliza let out a sigh. To pull something like this when everyone is already so busy. She closed her eyes. Why is Rosanna going this far? In Eliza's memory, Rosanna looked at grandfather lying on the ground and laughed. Uncle, in the end, if it still came to this. Eliza pressed a hand to her forehead. That was exactly what Rosanna had said while looking at grandfather collapsed on the floor. Could it be that she harbors an inferiority complex toward grandfather? Eliza fell into thought. People always said that after grandfather left the family, the Leonette family began to waver. Eliza felt remorse. Without knowing anything, I let that woman run wild at grandfather's side for a full 3 years. A clear bell rang as someone pushed open the shop door. Eliza turned in surprise and looked toward the entrance. A blond man stood at the door and asked, "Are you already closed?" He wore a neat white uniform with a blue cape draped over his shoulders. The blond man continued, "I'd like to look around the shop a bit." It is rapide. Yes, of course. Please, go ahead. Eliza watched his back. I had been planning to close right away, but judging by the look of him, he probably won't stay long. The blond man said politely, "Then excuse me." Eliza watched him, thinking that simply driving away a customer felt a little wrong. He really looked like a prince straight out of fairy tale. Someone like that actually coming to a pawn shop as a customer. Eliza studied the way he was dressed. His clothes looked like a knight's uniform. Could he be? Eliza remembered something her grandfather had once said. Sometimes knights came by to ask for cooperation in investigations. Eliza thought, I really should prepare some business cards in advance. The blond man walked up to the counter, and Eliza looked at him. The blond man asked, "Are you Eliza here?" Eliza replied, "Yes, that's me." After a brief silence, the blond man said, "I see." Eliza looked at him in confusion. The blond man continued, "Who gave you permission to conduct business here?" Eliza stared at the man before her. What is this guy's problem? Is he not a knight, but some kind of thug? Eliza's hand moved beneath the counter. Finally, I have a chance to test my new magic tool. Eliza replied with a smile. Permission? This building is property under my name. The blond man pressed on. Aren't you trading in relics at this shop? Have you reported your relic transactions to the World Tree Temple? Eliza thought. In principle, any handling of relics must be reported to the World Tree Temple. Although that law has been in place for 500 years, by now, it's become one that no one actually enforces. Many of the relics the temple once held have gone missing, and the number of newly appearing relics far exceeds the vacancies. The temple simply has no way to manage every single one. Eliza looked at the blonde man. The blonde man asked, "So you mean you've never reported them?" Eliza immediately retorted, "No, I did not say that." She took out a thick ledger and slapped it onto the table. "Since this pawn shop opened, I have gathered every document dated after February 7th, Imperial Year 912, including records of relic transactions reported to the temple." The blonde man flipped through the ledger. Eliza watched him from the side. But how did he even know there was a relic in this shop? At the moment, the only relic here was that pendant being kept in storage. Eliza thought, could this person be one of Uncle's followers too? Did he come for that pendant as well? The blonde man said in a calm voice, "I've confirmed it." Eliza looked at him and asked, "Then will you apologize for your reckless suspicion just now?" The blonde man replied, "No, I have other apologies to make later, so I'll postpone that for now." He turned around and ordered, "Open the door." Eliza froze and asked, "What?" The blonde man continued, "Open the door to the second floor as well. If I count to 3 and you still haven't opened it, I'll enter by force." Eliza stared at him. If this man really was a knight, he shouldn't be doing something like this. The blonde man headed straight for the stairs. Eliza's heart tightened. That was where the pendant was. Eliza pressed the mechanism beneath the counter. As long as it hit the target, a rope would shoot out and bind the opponent, right? Eliza looked at the blue sphere that rolled onto the counter. They haven't even identified themselves. If I pretend afterward that I didn't know. Eliza froze. The sphere hadn't activated as expected. The blonde man looked at her and said, "I saw that clearly just now. You try to hide that thing." When he kept walking toward the stairs, Eliza hurried after him and shouted, "Wait!" She spread her arms and blocked the foot of the stairs. "If you recklessly break the second floor door, that counts as property damage." The blonde man stopped and asked, "In that case, why don't you open it yourself?" Eliza hesitated, then replied, "I'd like to open it, but..." She stuck out her tongue and said, "I lost the key to the second floor." The blonde man replied expressionlessly, "In that case, you should move aside all the more. I'll open it for you." Eliza sighed, looking at the ornaments at his waist, and asked, "Did you come to confiscate a relic?" The blonde man countered, "Would that change anything?" Eliza stared at his back and asked, "How did you know it was here?" Eliza looked at the golden ornament on his cape and said, "Ah, you found it through that, didn't you?" The blonde man replied coldly, "I have no obligation to tell you." Eliza smiled to herself. "Things are going just as planned." The blonde man asked, "So you mean you will open this door?" Eliza replied, "Of course. If I resist, I'll be the only one who suffers." She spread her hands and continued, "Then please show me a search warrant. Ah, and bring the evidence as well. At the very least, you should have some kind of statement or report, shouldn't you?" The blonde man stared at her in silence, then said, "The authority I possess takes precedence over personal property rights." Eliza answered without backing down, "Fine, then I'll see you in court." She glared at the blonde man and said, "Bring a warrant before I alert the neighbors." The blonde man ignored her and stepped forward. Eliza hurriedly reached out, grabbed his arm, and shouted, "Wait, where do you think you're going?" The blonde man suddenly let out a muffled sound and froze in place. Eliza looked at him. "What is this? Some kind of life-threatening threat?" He covered his forehead, looking deeply pained. Eliza was flustered. I only pushed his arm. Why is he clutching his head? What's going on? If this is some hidden method, so subtle, I can't even detect it. The blonde man glared at Eliza and asked, "What kind of magic tool are you using?" He stared at her and said, "The more you try to conceal it, the deeper my suspicions grow." Eliza replied in disbelief, "What are you talking about?" Angrily clutching her head, she shouted, "First you threatened me with self-harm, and now you're trying to pin the blame on me too? What is with that expression? Anyone who saw you would think I did something terrible. You're the one who's been threatening me this whole time, and now you're spouting nonsense too." Eliza suddenly turned her head. Alt was standing by the doorway with his arms crossed, coldly watching the scene inside. A low voice came from the entrance. "What are you doing?" The blonde man still held his forehead, his expression dark, as he looked toward the door. Alt looked at the blonde man expressionlessly and said, "If you're finished with your business here, leave at once, before this lady draws everyone here." The blonde man lowered the hand covering his forehead and replied coldly, "Fine, I'll return later." He turned to Eliza, his voice carrying a warning. but your business is not entirely free. Even if you try to hide it, I'll track it down and find it in the end. The blonde man walked toward the door, brushed past Alt, and left the shop. Eliza collapsed onto the floor and let out a long breath. Alt walked over to Eliza, who was sitting weakly on the ground, and asked, "Are you all right? Did he do anything to you?" Eliza lowered her head and replied, "No, it's not like that. I think I was just too tense." Alt stopped and held out a hand to her. Eliza abruptly stood up on her own. Alt withdrew his hand with a faint look of disappointment and straightened his collar. Eliza asked in confusion, "Huh? Were you just reaching a hand out to me?" Alt crossed his arms, turned his face away, and said, "You're talking nonsense again." In a stiff tone, he added, "Nothing happened just now, so don't get the wrong idea." Eliza looked at Alt and asked, "By the way, do you know that person from earlier? It felt like the two of you recognized each other." Alt gave a slight nod and replied, "A little." Eliza continued, "Was that person really a knight? He wasn't pretending, was he?" Alt answered firmly, "He really is a knight." Eliza looked puzzled and asked, "Do knights usually talk like that kind of well-dressed scum?" Alt paused for a moment and asked back, "Well-dressed? What?" Eliza repeated firmly, "Scum is scum." Alt looked at Eliza and said, "Not all knights are like him. It is also softly." "Thank you." Somewhat puzzled, Alt asked, "Is that really something worth thanking me for?" Eliza covered her mouth and laughed quietly. "No, I'm just grateful that you helped me. From a customer's point of view, if someone tried to snoop around on a second floor they'd never even seen, they'd probably find it very troubling." Alt stopped walking. He fell into thought. Eliza turned and asked, "Oh right, why are you here?" Alt stayed silent and did not answer. Privately, he wondered, what exactly was that knight looking for? Eliza continued, I was told to open it from the second floor." Alt looked at Eliza and said, "He's looking for a holy relic." Eliza replied in surprise, "Were you standing there eavesdropping the whole time? Honestly, if you already knew, then why ask me?" Alt asked seriously, "Do you know exactly which holy relic he was after?" Eliza asked back, "Why are you interested in that?" She thought to herself, Rena's uncle said he would find that pendant. Did he ask the information guild too? Is Alt looking for it as well? If that's the case, I can't give Alt the information either. Alt replied, "No, I didn't hear." Eliza lowered her head and said, "At first he looked like some shining prince, so I had high expectations. But he turned out to be really scary." Alt repeated in confusion, "Prince?" Eliza raised her head and said firmly, "Yes, like the prince in fairy tales. Like a prince riding a white horse." Eliza looked at Alt and quietly breathed a sigh of relief and sighed. "Good, playing dumb work for now. Though it feels like my image is getting stranger and stranger." A clear bell rang. Eliza suddenly remembered something and shouted, "Oh no, I forgot the Merchants Guild meeting." She hurried toward the table, muttering nonstop about the festival. "I still have so much to say. They won't refuse to listen just because I'm late, will they?" She picked up the papers on the table and suddenly froze. As she flipped through the documents, Eliza murmured to herself, "Come to think of it, that knight never actually explained why he came, did he?" Alt stood nearby in silence. Eliza turned to him and said, "Hey, mister, sorry, but can we talk later? I have something really urgent to take care of right now." Alt looked at her and still said nothing. Eliza didn't have time to care. She pushed open the door and ran outside, leaving behind only the sound of the door hinge turning and the fading sound of footsteps. Eliza looked at the letter in her hand. It was a letter from Hannah. Compared to the previous draft, only one thing had changed. To obtain a permit, one needed either a blood relative as guarantor or a noble whose status alone was enough proof. Eliza abruptly stood up and ran to the door with the letter in hand. In another lavish room, Alt sat at a desk, looking at the document in front of him. Alt said quietly, "How strange." Looking at the broken magic tool in his hand, he heard a fragmented report coming from it. Trade in holy relic. Report. Compulsory enforcement. Alt fell into thought. Why did the business card magic device suddenly break? It should have transmitted sound on contact, but what reason would there have been to touch the card like that? Alt turned his head, recalling the man. Alan, commander of the Imperial Holy Knights. Alt remembered Alan's stern face. He didn't recognize me, but he seemed to notice something. Alt sank into thought. Why would someone like him personally go to that pawn shop, looking for a holy relic? Could it be for Lugnauth? Alt's gaze deepened. Lugnauth is certainly a tempting prospect, even to the Empire, but the Empire shouldn't know anything about the world of Lugnauth. The image of Eve flashed through Alt's mind. If Eve had smuggled Lugnauth into the Empire, then there would be no reason for Alan, commander of the Holy Knights, to go looking for it personally. Alt fell silent, his eyes shifting aside. Pressing a hand to his forehead, Alt sank into deep doubt. Am I too fixated on Lugnov? Searching for a holy relic may only be a pretext. Alan may have some other objective. The other strange thing is this. When I touched that man, why did Alan react in such pain? Alt recalled the scene. Alan had clutched his head tightly, his expression extremely strained. Alt continued thinking, if it was a magic tool subtle enough that even I couldn't detect it, what kind of thing was it? With the strength of the commander of the Holy Knights, he couldn't be affected so easily by an ordinary magic tool. Alt lowered his hand, his gaze turning resolute. First, I should investigate this commander of the Holy Knights. He stood up and walked to the window, his cape swaying gently with emotion. In a conference room filled with filing cabinets, merchants sat around a long table. They were discussing in low voices when suddenly the door was flung open with a loud bang. Helena jumped at the commotion and turned toward the entrance. Smiling, Helena said, "Welcome, Eliza." Eliza braced herself against the doorframe, breathing heavily, clutching the document tightly in her hand. Helena asked with concern, "Why are you breathing so hard? Did you run all the way here?" Eliza steadied her breathing and replied, I'm also very happy to see you." She quickly walked to the table, handed over the document, and said, "Lady Helena, please look at this first." Helena took the document and read it carefully. Her expression grew more and more grave. In a low voice, Helena asked, "Are you sure this is real? Is the source of this information reliable?" Eliza nodded hard and replied firmly, "Of course." Helena set the document down, turned to the others in the conference room, and announced loudly, "Everyone, please listen. Today's agenda regarding the festival is postponed for now." Confused voices immediately erupted in the room. "What? Why so suddenly?" With a serious expression, Helena explained, "Because something more urgent has come up. The merchant permit format is going to be revised. Some of you may already have heard this from William, but the revised contents are extremely severe. To obtain a permit, an applicant must have a blood relative or a noble whose status is sufficient to serve as a guarantor." The room instantly exploded into uproar. Merchants whispered and argued among themselves. One merchant shouted angrily, "Can they really just announce something like this on a whim?" Another said tearfully, "That means if you have no family and don't know any nobles, you'll have no choice but to shut down." Standing among the crowd, Eliza listened to the noisy complaints around her and thought, "This is obvious. Rosanna is the only one who would use a method like this. She must be trying to force grandfather out this way." Eliza clenched her fists and cursed inwardly. What a vicious woman, to force grandfather to show himself. She's taking the whole street hostage. She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. "Pull yourself together. Even if this is to protect grandfather, I can't just do nothing." As the sun set and the evening glow spread over the street's buildings, Eliza returned to the shop, braced both hands on the counter, and fell into thought. Rosanna only has two goals. Either I bring grandfather to her, or I kneel and beg her for mercy. Eliza sighed. Why has there been nothing but trouble lately? She held her head, looking more and more anxious. That strange pendant worries me too. If that well-dressed scum comes back, how am I supposed to drive him away? If I could find another holy relic, maybe I could hide the pendant. Do I really have to go excavate the temple ruins? Or maybe that holy relic thief? A series of footsteps interrupted Eliza's thoughts. "Hello." Eliza whipped around toward the door. Crescent stood there. "I came back for the appointment we made during my travels," he continued. "You remember me, don't you?" Eliza cried out in alarm. "Crescents." Seeing her reaction, Crescent said, "What kind of response is that? How harsh." Pointing at him, Eliza shouted, "How dare you, you thief, come barging in here." Eliza pointed a blue sphere at the floor. The instant it touched the ground, it burst open. Eliza thought, right, that one was a defective product. With a loud bang, a huge net shot out of the sphere and neatly covered the intruding Crescents. Tangled in the net, Crescents fell to the floor and said helplessly, "What an enthusiastic welcome." Eliza looked at Crescents trapped inside and was filled with confusion. That thing wasn't broken after all. She crouched down to inspect the net's ropes. "This won't loosen, will it?" Through the net, Crescents looked at her and said, "It won't come loose. And I don't intend to untie it in front of you, either." He continued, "So now that you've tied me up, what are you planning to do?" Eliza crossed her arms over her chest. "Why are you here again?" Sitting inside the net, Crescents explained, "Our first meeting certainly didn't go very well, so I came to clear up the misunderstanding and apologize." Eliza asked back, "Misunderstanding?" Crescents said seriously, I really am not a thief. I even brought proof. It's in the bag over there. Eliza picked up the gray bag from the floor. Proof. Sitting in the net, Cressens muttered, let's talk after you untie me. I have a lot of questions I want to ask you too. Eliza crouched down and rummaged through the bag. Cressens turned his head and asked, what are you curious about? Without looking up, Eliza kept searching. Cressens continued on his own. For example, how you managed to appraise a holy relic so quickly. Don't worry, I'm not some sort of industrial spy. If I had to call it something, it would be academic curiosity. Eliza pulled a delicate snow globe out of the bag. Ah, I see. She stood up holding the snow globe, her voice turning dark. So, I suppose you kept this thing out of academic curiosity too? Eliza roared furiously. Where exactly did you steal this holy relic snow globe from? Through the net, Cressens shouted in protest. I didn't steal it. Do you think I'm crazy enough to bring stolen goods and show them to you? Eliza glared at him and asked, then why do you have this? Cressens answered as if it were obvious. Because my job has to do with holy relics. Eliza pressed him, a job related to holy relics? Do you work at the temple? Cressens hesitated. Well, I can't reveal the details, but it is something like that. Eliza accused him angrily. I knew it. You stole another holy relic, and now you're shamelessly lying about it. Holding the snow globe, Eliza turned to leave. Startled, Cressens shouted, W8, why are you taking that? With solemn determination, Eliza said, I'm taking back what you stole to the place it belongs. Trapped in the net, Cressens asked in surprise, you're taking it to the temple? You're not going to keep it for yourself. Eliza answered without turning around. That's right. So until I get back, don't think you're making a single coin off this. She strode toward the door. Until I return, you stay right here and prepare to be punished until you're crying your eyes out. The door slammed shut with a crisp locking sound. Cressens stared blankly from inside the net and let out a puzzled sigh. Looking at the closed door, he muttered, well, anyway, taking it back to the temple is a relief. But, trapped in the net, Cressens fell into thought. She recognized another holy relic at a glance. How'd she do that? The appraisal result for that snow globe had always been vague. It was only recently determined to be a holy relic. But if she recognized it immediately, Cressens smiled. This is no longer coincidence. Looking at his bandaged hand, he let out a helpless sigh. I can't believe I've been mistaken for a thief again. The temple is conducting a holy relic recovery operation. That is secret, so I suppose the misunderstanding is understandable. Cressens raised a hand. Golden light bloomed at his fingertips and easily pierced through the net, binding him. And I'm a book bishop. That's an even bigger secret that can't be told. The ropes binding Cressens snapped apart inch by inch in the golden light and scattered across the floor. Cressens stood up and walked to the door. Although she told me to stay here. He pushed it open. I'm afraid I need to return to the temple first. The grand temple stood in the night, its spires piercing the clouds. Alan was walking through one of the temple's corridors, his footsteps echoing through the empty hall. He stopped before a massive archway. Standing before the ornate door, Alan knocked. Your Highness, are you inside? A voice came from within. Come in. Alan pushed open the door and entered the spacious study. Katerina sat by the desk and asked, what is it? Alan glanced around, looking slightly hesitant. This, Katerina explained calmly. My uncle came by earlier. Alan looked at her. Katerina continued. He said he was looking for that pendant. Marquis Crottle blocked my path and asked, where did you hide it? He stepped closer, his tone growing harsher. My sister's pendant. Katerina, cloaked in black, stiffened under the pressure. Marquis Crottle looked down at her. That is not your sister's pendant. Katerina clenched the hand hidden beneath her cloak. The Marquis let out a confused demand. What? Katerina lifted her head, looked him in the eye, and shouted back. It was my mother's pendant. Marquis Crottle ground his teeth, his eyes filled with fury. How dare you be so insolent? The Marquis turned to the maids behind him and ordered, you can't have hidden it anywhere special. Search the room from top to bottom. Find that emerald pendant no matter what. The maids immediately began searching the room. They pulled back bed sheets, rummaged through cabinets, and the whole room filled with chaotic noise. Katerina stood to the side, watching her room be torn apart. The once tidy sitting room became a mess. Tables and chairs were shoved over, odds and ends scattered everywhere. Katerina stood alone in the middle of the carpet. Marquis Crottle stood opposite her and demanded angrily once more, where exactly did you hide it? Katerina replied coolly. Somewhere you will never find. Marquis Crodle roared in fury. I'll search the entire palace. No, I'll search the whole empire to find it. Don't think you can keep it hidden forever. The scene returned to the study. Katerina looked at Alan and asked, I heard you went to Grey Ash Street today. Alan gave a slight bow and answered, yes. By order of His Highness the Regent, I conducted a search of Grey Ash Street. He continued, recalling the place. There was a pawn shop there that looked quite shabby, standing by the desk. Alan looked at Katerina and said, but the owner of that place was a rather young woman. Katerina asked, why are you telling me this? Alan replied, because it appears the thing His Highness the Regent ordered me to find is there. Katerina's expression turned anxious. Sir Alan, don't tell me. You're not really going to do this, are you? She jumped to her feet and demanded, are you planning to obey my uncle's orders? Staring at him, Katerina continued, you are the commander of the Holy Knights. You are a man who swore loyalty to the imperial family. Alan reached out and took Katerina's hand. As Your Highness says, I once swore to dedicate everything I have, he said, looking at Katerina, to this empire. Katerina looked at the man before her. Since Uncle is the one ruling the empire now, does that mean he intends to follow Uncle's will? Alan dropped to one knee. I once swore that until my life ends, I would protect Priestliff. However, protecting the place Your Highness wishes to protect is extremely difficult. Katerina looked at him. Alan rose and said, please get some rest, Your Highness. He turned and left, leaving Katerina standing alone in the empty hall. Standing by the round table, Katerina watched his departing back. The door shut with a dull sound. Katerina lowered her gaze to her own hands, her eyes full of worry. Pressing a hand to her chest, she murmured, I have to protect her. She picked up the black cloak nearby and draped it over her shoulders. Katerina pulled up the hood, concealing her bright red hair. Her gaze grew resolute. She strode out of the room, her cloak billowing behind her. Katerina, the imperial princess of Priestliff, vanished into the night. Eliza looked at the temple before her. The last time I came, it was deep into the night, and the great doors were shut, so I didn't get a good look. Eliza walked through the temple. By day, the temple looked truly magnificent. Eliza recalled what happened earlier. By the time I got back to the pawn shop, that thief had already disappeared. How in the world did he escape? A priest standing before the crowd said, this is a holy relic being shown publicly for the first time today. Eliza stopped and looked ahead. The priest continued, introducing it to the believers. It is said this motif is the Lord of Birds, a devotee cherished by the World Tree. Looking at the relic in the priest's hand, someone exclaimed, Father, it's so beautiful. Eliza looked at the object in the priest's hand. That's a holy relic? No matter how I look at it, it doesn't seem like a holy relic. Covering her mouth, Eliza thought, could you have been fooled? She walked over to the priest and greeted him. Hello, Father. The priest stopped and looked at her. Pointing at the item in the priest's hand, Eliza asked, I overheard just now, this bird-shaped handicraft really is a holy relic? The priest smiled and replied, Of course it is, sister. Curious, Eliza asked, then how do you tell what is a holy relic and what isn't? The priest patiently explained, Haha, so that's what interests you. To be honest, I don't know the institutional details all that well either, but looking at Eliza, he said, I've heard that from time to time there are some utterly impious people who forge holy relics. Eliza asked in surprise, Really? How do they do it? The priest continued, Unlike true holy relics blessed directly by Lord World Tree, they use concentrated holy water to infuse them with sacred power. Of course, that too may be called divine power, but must be distinguished from a true holy relic. Eliza looked at the bird-shaped craft in the priest's hand. No wonder I couldn't see that unique color. So they used holy water. The priest added, other than saying it takes a long period of appraisal to tell the two apart, it's hard to explain in any more detail. Eliza gave a slight bow of thanks. Thank you. Smiling, the priest replied, May blessings be with you, sister. Watching the priest walk away, Eliza thought, do they verify it by some method outside the visible spectrum? She sank into thought. Even if I tell them that this authenticated holy relic is fake, will they admit it? After all, they've already put it on display. But I can't just stand by and watch a fake sit there so brazenly. Eliza opened her eyes, her gaze turning firm. First, I'll do what I came here for. Then I'll tell them. Eliza approached another priest and greeted him. "Hello." The priest turned around and replied, "Welcome, sister. What brings you here?" Eliza looked at him and asked, "I'd like to learn about the process for borrowing a holy relic." The priest looked Eliza up and down thoughtfully. "Could you be a messenger sent by a bishop from another diocese?" Eliza shook her head and replied, "No." The priest continued guessing. "Then are you perhaps a descendant of some canonized saint?" Eliza fell into thought. Grandfather never believed in the world tree from the beginning. If they canonized someone like grandfather as a saint, wouldn't that mean there was something seriously wrong? The priest smiled and replied, "In that case, borrowing a holy relic would be impossible." Eliza quickly said, I heard there was another qualification requirement." She rummaged through her bag while the priest looked at her in confusion. Eliza took out a crystal ball, showed it to him, and said, "What if someone has rendered great service to the World Tree Temple?" The priest froze when he saw the crystal ball. Eliza continued, "Would returning a stolen holy relic still not be enough?" The priest examined the crystal ball closely and said, "This is indeed a holy relic that once belonged to the temple, but..." He looked at Eliza seriously and asked, "Sister, why do you have this?" Looking at the crystal ball, he added, "This is indeed the item that went missing yesterday." The priest suddenly raised his head and shouted, "Guards!" 2 guards immediately rushed over. Pointing at Eliza, the priest ordered, "Don't let this person escape." Eliza stood there dumbfounded. "Excuse me? What are you saying?" Eliza felt a wave of panic. "What is going on? Do they think I stole it and then shamelessly came back to return it?" The 2 guards stepped forward and seized Eliza by the shoulders. Eliza was forcibly taken away. "If I could just bring them the real thief, this would be resolved quickly." But Eliza looked toward the priest. Judging by that look on his face, he has no intention of listening to any explanation. Even if I told him now that the displayed relic is fake, he probably wouldn't believe me. A figure in splendid white robes appeared at the entrance. Eliza looked at the newcomer. "Who is that? More importantly, has your eyesight recovered?" The priest and guards immediately bowed. Looking at the white-robed figure before her, Eliza said, "Hello." The white-robed person did not speak, but lowered his head and wrote on a sheet of paper. Eliza looked at the note he handed her. It read, "A pleasure to meet you, sister. It is very good that we can meet in this way." Eliza grew suspicious. Is he from the Silent Order? The white-robed man continued writing, "On his behalf, I apologize for his rudeness just now. You said you came to return a holy relic." Eliza nodded and replied, "Yes, this crystal ball." She explained, "A thief had it, but I thought it would be best to bring it back, so I brought it here." After hearing that, the white-robed man let out a quiet laugh. Eliza was somewhat puzzled. He has a rather unique sense of humor. The white-robed man continued writing, "How did you know this was a holy relic? Did the thief tell you so himself?" Elisa replied, "No, I work at a pawn shop, so I know a bit about appraisals." The white-robed man paused his pen and wrote again, "How did you appraise this holy relic so accurately?" Eliza sank into thought. Do I say it's because I saw the color of the light? But that's something everyone knows, though I do feel I sense it more clearly than others. Carefully, Eliza answered, "When appraising something, you must always remain cautious." She recalled a scene from when grandfather taught her. He had once held up a gemstone and said, "But sometimes you must trust your instincts." Smiling, Eliza said to the white-robed man, "My grandfather taught me a lot." The white-robed man wrote, "I see. You said you want to borrow a holy relic. Since you returned one, I will regard that as a significant service and permit you to borrow one for a certain period." Eliza replied in delight, "Really? Thank you." Leaning closer, she lowered her voice and said, "Oh, right. The bird-shaped holy relic in the exhibition hall. I think you should have someone reappraise it. To me, that thing really doesn't look like a holy relic." The corners of the white-robed man's mouth lifted slightly. He wrote, "I will do so. Thank you for the suggestion." Eliza looked at him. He's a broad-minded priest. What a relief. The priest stepped forward and apologized to Eliza. "I'm sorry, sister. I was rude to you without investigating properly." Eliza replied, "It's all right. These things happen." The priest pointed to the side and said, "We will assist you with the holy relic borrowing procedures. Please come this way." Just as Eliza was about to leave, the white-robed man gently patted her shoulder. He wrote on the paper, "Sister, I will soon send someone to your workplace. I may have a matter that requires your personal assistance. Welcome them, but this time, please keep it simple." Eliza was puzzled. Simple? Does he mean that because he's a priest, I don't need to be overly formal? Eliza gave him a bright smile and replied, "Of course, please come by any time." She thought to herself, if I can stay on good terms with the temple, maybe holy water will be cheaper in the future. Eliza waved goodbye. "Then I'll be off first." The white-robed man remained where he was and raised a hand in response. After Eliza left, the white-robed man looked at the priest beside him and ordered, "Remove that bird-shaped crystal craft immediately." The priest bowed respectfully. "Yes, Lord Book Bishop." The Book Bishop continued, "Also, bring the appraiser who certified that item before me." The priest immediately replied, "Understood." The Book Bishop stood alone beneath the corridor, watching the direction Eliza had gone. "That should be enough to pay the appraisal fee, right?" Looking that way, the Book Bishop said, "Then let us meet again, Eliza." Carrying the holy relic she had borrowed, Eliza walked along the temple corridor. She opened the box in her hands and looked at the faintly glowing object inside. Though the glow was a little weak, a holy relic was still a holy relic. Eliza stopped and looked ahead. There stood an ancient stone altar, pale blue petals drifting around it. Looking at the scene before her, Eliza thought, is this a sacred encounter? Walking through the temple garden, she reflected, under grandfather's influence, I never really believed in the gods. But if the reason I was given a second life truly is the mercy of Lord World Tree. Eliza stopped, folded her hands before her chest, closed her eyes, and prayed, "Thank you, Lord World Tree. I'll do more good deeds. I really will." Lowering her head, she continued silently in her heart, "So please grant me one very, very small wish." Eliza opened her eyes and looked into the distance. "Grandfather, please don't let him forget me." At the base of a grand manor, everything seemed especially quiet in the sunlight. Inside the bedroom, Michelle sat propped up against the headboard, looking out the window. A maid entered carrying a tray and said, "I've brought your medicine and the newspaper." Michelle withdrew his gaze and replied, "You're here. Just leave them there." The maid gently set the tray on the cabinet beside the bed. Standing by the bed, the maid said, "I'm very sorry, but I must confirm that you take your medicine before I can leave." The elderly Michelle looked at her and replied, "All right. My memory isn't what it used to be." Michelle picked up the glass of water from the tray and took the medicine. The maid watched from aside. Michelle put the empty glass back on the tray, and the maid immediately said, "I've confirmed that you took it. I'll take my leave now." After a hurried bow, she turned and ran out of the room. Michelle watched her departing back. "It seems she's treating me like some kind of wicked loan shark. But with things this way, it makes matters much simpler." The old man lifted his water glass. He noticed it had already been switched. Eliza smiled and said, "Grandfather, please give me the seal. I'll protect your pawn shop." Holding the glass, the old man walked to the door, then pushed open the window. Michelle poured out the remaining liquid from the cup. "Don't worry about anything. Just get some rest." He walked to the window and braced himself against the frame. "That's right. You must protect it, Eliza." Then, looking out at the scenery beyond, he added, you must protect yourself." In another lavish room, Emma looked at Eliza and asked, "I heard the deadline for finding a guarantor is tonight at midnight." Emma shook her head and said, "Thank goodness you found out in advance, Eliza." Eliza looked at Emma and asked, "Do you have a guarantor?" Emma nodded. "I do. I'm one of the very few mages who still keeps in touch with her family." Then Emma seemed to remember something and asked, "By the way, isn't Michelle supposed to come today for the first time in a while?" Eliza lowered her gaze. Grandfather is very far away right now. He said there's no way he can make it back in time." Emma pressed, "Then what are you going to do?" With her hands on her hips, Eliza answered lightly, "Don't worry. I'll find someone else to help." Emma smiled. "I'm sure you can handle it." Then Eliza said, "Come to think of it, what did you need from me today? Do you need another magical tool?" Eliza looked at her and replied, "Not exactly." Eliza opened her palm. Resting, there was a deep blue sphere. Looking at Emma, she said, "Emma, you know this is a defective one, right?" Emma cried out in surprise, "Defective? That word doesn't exist in Emma's dictionary." Emma took the sphere and gathered magic in both hands to examine it. After a moment, she said in confusion, "There's nothing wrong with it at all." Eliza leaned closer. "Really?" Eliza recalled what had happened before. "But the first time I used it, nothing happened. And the second time, the person caught in the net somehow broke free and escaped on their own." Emma fell into thought. "Really? Emma suddenly looked up. I know. There was interference from holy power." Eliza asked, puzzled, "Holy power?" Emma nodded. "That's right. It feels like someone splashed an entire bucket of holy water on it. And there's something else strange." Eliza asked, "What's strange?" Emma thought back to Alan and Crescent's. Honestly, the way those two were acting. That was very strange. Eliza folded her arms and fell into thought. Emma looked at the sphere in her hand and said, "This thing has something it shouldn't have." In the manor's main hall, groups of knights had already sealed off the area. They stood around in small clusters, speaking in hushed voices. Eliza stood by the second-floor railing, looking down at the busy scene below. One knight, holding documents, said, "The knights have already taken control of the place." Hearing the commotion downstairs, Eliza turned her head toward the window. A noisy clamor rose from below. Eliza looked down and asked, "Have the knights arrived?" A figure appeared at the entrance to the hall. Alt walked in, a cross tattoo visible on his neck, a long sword hanging at his waist, his eyes cold as he surveyed the room. Looking at him, Eliza asked, "Why are you here?" "I don't happen to need any weapon consultations right now." Alt stepped inside and replied, "I'm not here for that." He paused, turned his head slightly, and said in a low voice, "I mean the knight who came here last time." Eliza suddenly understood. "Ah, you mean that shiny, overly polite thug?" Alt asked helplessly, "Why do you keep calling him shiny?" Then he looked at Eliza and warned, "Listen carefully and don't be too shocked. He's a holy knight." Eliza froze. Alt looked at her. "Did you know?" Eliza smiled. "In a lot of ways, he did seem kind of pitiful." Alt continued, "Then do you also know he's the commander of the Imperial Holy Knights?" Eliza went still. "What, really?" She fell into deep thought. Just who exactly is Lena's uncle, if he can order around the commander of the Imperial Holy Knights? More importantly, I remember there was some major news recently about the commander. Clutching at her hair, Eliza looked deeply agitated. Alt looked at her and said, "I didn't expect you to react this strongly." Eliza pressed a hand to her neck. My neck suddenly cramped up. She gave Alt a slight bow. "Anyway, thank you for telling me all this." Alt looked at her and asked, "Is that all you have to say?" Eliza looked at him and said, "Thank you very, very much for letting me know." Alt replied, "No, not that. Don't you need to ask for help?" Looking at Eliza, he continued, "I told you last time, if you need bodyguards or security, you can hire us. After all, a genuine Imperial Holy Knight is heading straight for your most precious pawn shop." Eliza smiled and replied, "Even so, for now I plan to try handling it myself. Thank you for the offer." Alt paused and asked, "What?" Eliza smiled. "To be honest, I'm not really used to accepting help from other people, and I've heard your rates are unbelievably expensive." Alt looked at Eliza and said, "Then start practicing today. I mean practicing accepting help from others." He turned and walked toward a corner of the hall. "I'll be over there. If you need help, just tell me." Looking at his back, Eliza replied, "I will. Thank you." The doors were pushed open, and heavy footsteps echoed through the quiet room. Alan appeared in the doorway and said, "Excuse me." He walked up to Eliza and handed her a document. "This is the search warrant you requested last time." Eliza took it. Alan stood before her, watching her. Then he said, "I'm sorry, I'm only properly introducing myself now." Looking at the document in her hands, Eliza froze in place. "Wait, this person's name is..." Alan bowed slightly and said solemnly, "Commander of the Pre-Slif Imperial Holy Knights, Alan Hugo Radion." Eliza stared at the man before her as countless fragments flashed through her mind. "I remember now. Why, I remember that newspaper article about this man." An old newspaper surfaced in her mind, its headline reading in bold letters, "Alan Hugo Radion, Commander of the Imperial Holy Knights, killed in a mysterious terrorist attack." Eliza looked at Alan in horror. This man is going to die very soon. Alan bowed again and said, "Commander of the Holy Knights of the Pre-Slif Imperial Palace. I am Alan Hugo Radion." Eliza looked at him. "I remember now why that article about this man stayed in my mind." The newspaper had stated clearly, "Alan Hugo Radion, Commander of the Imperial Holy Knights, died in a mysterious terrorist attack." Looking at the paper, Eliza thought, this man is about to die. Alan Hugo Radion was found dead in the palace late one night. His body was covered in tears and slash wounds. The sight had been horrifying, as though he had been attacked by some kind of wild beast. And yet there could not possibly have been such a beast inside the palace. Stranger still, the scene of the crime had been unnaturally clean. Other than black sand scattered all over the floor and shards of broken glass, there was nothing. That day, a tremendous crash had been heard near the commander's office. All the patrolling guards heard it. Based on the knight's testimony, most concluded it had been a terrorist attack carried out by a mage. However, the investigation produced an unexpected result. No trace was found of any mage. using magic power or casting spells. The final conclusion was this. The incident was ruled an accident caused by Alan attempting to use black magic. Once the brightest blade in the palace, Alan was reduced in an instant to the disgrace of all knights. The furious royal family immediately disbanded the Holy Knights, and Marquis Crottle's faction swiftly filled the gap. Looking at the situation before her, Eliza thought, no matter how I look at it, none of this makes sense. Would he really do something in his own office that, if discovered, would cost him his life? Stranger still, everything that happened afterward went far too smoothly. It was almost as if someone had planned it all in advance. Marquis Crottle sat in the seat of power, his expression unreadable. Alan looked at Eliza and said, "Then please let me see the holy relic you possess." Eliza came back to herself. She looked at Alan and said, "All right, please come this way." The two walked down the corridor, their footsteps echoing in the quiet interior. Eliza pushed open a door and led Alan inside. She went to the table and took out an exquisite little box. Handing it to Alan, Eliza said, "It's this." Looking at the box, Alan said, "Please open it." Eliza replied, "All right." She looked at him. He had no intention of touching the relic directly. So Emma was right. Emma had said, "This man has something he shouldn't have." Eliza had asked, "What is it?" Emma replied, "Magic power. Someone with holy power shouldn't be emitting magical energy." Eliza looked at Alan. "Holy power. Is that why I sensed that aura from him?" Emma had looked at Alan and said, "Someone probably forced magic power into him. In other words, he's suffering from mana pusoning." Eliza had looked thoughtful. Emma continued, "With holy power at his level, he must be either a high priest or a holy knight. No one would be stupid enough to cast magic directly on him. So he was most likely brought into secret contact with mana stones over a long period of time." Eliza had asked in confusion, "But who could secretly expose him to mana stones?" Emma replied, "They must have hidden the mana stones in everyday items and given them to him. A single fragment would never be enough. Even if compressed, the amount required would be enormous. Whoever did this is unbelievably vicious. If possible, you'd do better not to get involved." Eliza asked why. Emma explained, "When someone with mana poisoning comes into contact with holy power, they suffer extreme pain." In Eliza's mind appeared the image of someone writhing in agony, as if enduring torment beyond words. Eliza asked, "But he himself has holy power, doesn't he? That means he's suffering tremendous pain every second of every day. Shouldn't we sympathize with him?" Emma replied, "Of course he's pitiful. But when you met him, did he look sick or in pain?" Eliza shook her head. "No. If anything, he was extremely polite." Emma said gravely, "That's exactly why you mustn't get involved. If he's the kind of person who can suppress himself that completely, just imagine how ruthless he must be. I'm telling you, he's not normal." Eliza looked at Alan beside her. So with the relic this close to him now, this must be excruciating for him. Looking at Alan, she thought he must be in terrible pain. "I hope this ends quickly so he can leave." Alan looked at the relic and said, "Yes, I confirmed it." Alan bowed slightly and said, "Thank you for your cooperation." Eliza looked at him. "Is that all? Is it really over?" Alan turned to leave. Then Eliza suddenly reached out and grabbed his arm. "Please wait." Alan violently shook her hand off. He froze where he stood. Startled by his sudden reaction, Eliza blurted out, sorry." Alan stood motionless. "Originally, no matter whether this man was suffering from mana poisoning or not, I had no intention of getting involved." Eliza flipped through the documents in her hand. "I've already found out who led the permit revision. It was Marquis Crottle, the regent. They say he gave the order after attending a tea party. I'm currently investigating who was present at that tea party. But now things are different. If Crottle and Alan are on the same side, then Crottle would have no reason to hurt this man. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. If I want to help him, I need to find out exactly how he came into contact with magic." Alan stood there with a cold expression. Looking at him, Eliza thought, but he would never reveal his weakness so easily. Once again, she held out the box containing the relic and asked, "Are you sure you don't need to inspect it more carefully?" Alan looked away and replied, "No, this is enough." Looking at the relic, Alan said, "Since you have the temple's authorization, then of course it is a certified holy relic." Eliza looked at him. "Are you feeling unwell?" Alan replied, "I'm fine." Eliza continued, "Speaking of which, I once heard something. Some people feel pain when exposed to holy power. Alan gave her a polite but cold smile. I am a holy knight. How could someone like me possibly? Eliza cut him off. Could it be that you're suffering from mana poisoning? Alan frotze. Mana poisoning? Eliza nodded. Yes, I read of a similar case in an old manuscript. It described a priest suffering from mana poisoning. In the end, they discovered a mana stone hidden inside a pillow he had received as a gift. Have you received any gifts recently? Alan pressed a hand to his forehead and fell into thought. Before they departed on the pilgrimage, they said they were entrusting the palace to me and gave me a present. In his mind, an attendant appeared holding an ornate gift box. Inside it was an hourglass. It was a gift His Majesty had personally chosen for the commander of the Holy Knights. Alan's expression turned grave. If it was something that could conceal a mana stone. Watching his reaction, Eliza said, "It seems you've thought of something." Alan shook his head. No. He lowered his eyes, avoiding Eliza's gaze. His Majesty would never do such a thing to me. Even if it were true, there must be some special reason for it. Alan looked at Eliza and asked, more importantly, have you found a guarantor? I heard you have to find one before midnight tonight. Eliza lowered her head. I'm trying, but it isn't easy. The two walked side by side down the corridor. Alan said, the inspection is over. Let's talk outside. He stopped and pressed a hand to his forehead, looking pained. Then he continued, I just happen to know someone who can help you. Eliza asked in surprise. Really? She quickly caught up with him and asked, what kind of person are they? Alan suddenly stopped. Wait. He reached out and placed a hand on Eliza's shoulder. A tremendous force exploded in an instant, accompanied by a blinding light. The force sent Eliza flying backward. Eliza cried out as she was thrown back. What's happening? Just as she was about to fall, Alt caught her, held securely in his arms. Eliza looked up at him, still shaken. Muttering, Eliza said, what was that? Alt asked coldly, what exactly are you doing? Someone claiming to be the commander of the Holy Knights is attacking a commoner now. Held in Alt's arms, Eliza looked at the two men facing off and felt uneasy. At this rate, they're going to fight. She quickly got to her feet and stepped between them. It's not like that. Looking at the chaos before him, Alt asked in a low voice, then what exactly is this? Eliza looked at Alan and said, but he really didn't touch me. Eliza lowered her eyes, thinking hard. I don't know what happened, but it definitely wasn't Alan's intention. And he said he knew someone who could help me. Hesitantly, Eliza said, that. Then with a smile, she explained that Knight was doing that whole fake injury, throwing himself down act, so I thought I might as well try it too while I had the chance. She continued, that was supposed to be my trump card. I'll cut in, that's a lie. Staring at Eliza, Alt asked, why are you protecting that man? You kept saying he looked like he was glowing all over. Don't tell me you've actually fallen for that Knight. Elisa replied, no. I'd step closer. Or are you saying you'd rather trust that Knight you've only met twice than trust me? Eliza stood there watching the standoff before her. Alan drew his sword, the tip stopping at Alt's neck. Alan said, please do not threaten her. Alt let out a cold laugh. Huh. Alt raised a hand and pushed the blade away from his throat with 2 fingers. Looking at Alan, he said, from where I'm standing, the one threatening people right now is you. With a cry, Eliza hurried between them, trying to stop the clash. Then she looked at the figure that had appeared in the doorway and whispered, could that be Katerina? Katerina, cloaked in black, walked into the room. She lifted a hand and lowered her hood, revealing long red hair. Looking at Alan before her, Katerina asked in surprise, Your Highness, why are you here? Alan looked at Katerina and replied, I came to confirm whether the item I entrusted to you is still safe. Eliza repeated in confusion, Your Highness? Katerina walked toward Eliza. Eliza looked at her approaching figure. Katerina smiled and said, I left in such a hurry today that I didn't bring any money. Next time, I'll come with the payment. Looking at Eliza, Katerina added, and you don't need to worry about the guarantor issue. Eliza looked at her in disbelief. Could it be? The person who's going to help me is. Katerina replied, it seems Sir Alan has already told you. Once night falls, you'll understand. Pulling her black hood up again to cover her red hair, Katerina turned toward the door and said, we'll meet again. Alan followed behind Katerina, and the two walked out together. Alan turned back to look at Eliza and said, yes, Eliza. Until next time. Eliza watched them leave, clutching the pendant at her chest and softly repeating, until next time. A wave of dizziness hit her, and her body swayed to one side. Alt reached out to steady the wavering Eliza and asked with concern, are you all right? Eliza? Leaning against Alt, Eliza gave a weak smile. I think I'm just completely exhausted. Seeing her condition, Alt answered seriously, that's really not something to laugh about. Eliza lowered her head. You're right, it isn't funny, but Eliza closed her heavy eyes and murmured, I just want to sleep for 30 minutes. Honestly, I'd rather just pass out, but I still have things to do. Looking at the Eliza, who was practically falling asleep in his arms, Alt gave a helpless smile and said, So you're planning to use me as an alarm clock? Resting against Alt's shoulder, Eliza said softly, Actually, I was a little scared just now. Eliza leaned against Alt and whispered, But seeing you here made me feel relieved. So I want to ask one more favor of you. Eliza's voice grew softer and softer, and in the end she collapsed over the table, fast asleep. Standing beside it, Alt looked at the sleeping Eliza and said, Unbelievable. He lowered his gaze to the thick ledger on the table and thought, this is the perfect chance to inspect it. Alt reached out and opened the ledger. He quickly flipped through the pages. If I can find any trace of Eve here, I'll finally be able to leave this place for good. In the silent room, he continued searching, the sound of turning pages echoing in the air. Closing the ledger, Alt let out a long breath. Looking at the book in his hands, he felt a strange sense of unease. How odd. Standing by the desk, he looked at Eliza asleep with her head resting on the table. It was as if he had expected all of this from the start. Inside, he felt no surprise at all. Alt placed a hand on the ledger. Perhaps I already knew this woman was truly innocent. Eliza slept on, her breathing steady and even. In her sleep, she made a faint little sound. Eliza shifted uneasily on the desk, her hands groping across the tabletop until they touched Alt's arm. Alt, one hand still on the ledger, was just about to move her away. But Eliza turned her head in her sleep and used Alt's arm as a pillow, continuing to sleep. Alt looked at her sleeping face, his expression unreadable. Just then, the red gemstone on Alt's cuff suddenly began to glow. Staring at the light, Alt thought, this reaction. He looked at Eliza, slumped over the desk, and drew a conclusion. Eve really was here, and not long ago. But there was no trace of Eve in the ledger Eliza wrote in. If that was the case, then it had to have been that man she calls her grandfather, who made a move. Eastern Empire, Count Lamont's territory. Standing inside a lavish estate, Rosanna furiously demanded of the man before her. We searched the entire True Leaf forest and found nothing. How is that possible? Looking at the enraged Rosanna, Nicholas nervously tried to calm her. My lady, please calm down. Rosanna spun around and shouted, Do I look like someone who can calm down right now? Nicholas shrank back in fear, shoulders hunched, hands flailing helplessly in panic. Rosanna stared at the man before her. That's right. You must have missed something. Are you absolutely certain you didn't erase or omit anything you thought was unimportant? Nicholas took a step back and stammered. WH, what do you mean by that? Rosanna closed in and shouted, The copy of the Spirit of Colonia at Neff. You painted it, didn't you? Rosanna grabbed Nicholas by the collar and yanked him close. Nicholas pleaded, My lady, you know this already. I copied it exactly as it was. Rosanna let go, and Nicholas collapsed to the floor. Pointing at the door, Rosanna shouted, Get out. Immediately, Nicholas scrambled away and fled the room, his footsteps fading down the corridor. Rosanna sat back down on the sofa, pressing a hand to her forehead as she muttered a curse. What a useless fool. Leaning back, she fell into thought. I heard Uncle didn't show his face today either, even though that pawn shop is on the verge of collapse. Rosanna curled her lips into a cold smile. Once that pawn shop goes under, tracking down his whereabouts will only be a matter of time. After all, that girl could never possibly find a guarantor. Just then, Hugo rushed into the room and shouted, Sis, something terrible's happened. Looking at Hugo barging in so late at night, Rosanna asked irritably, What is it at this hour? Hugo, breathing hard, replied, It's Uncle's pawn shop. They found a guarantor. The business license has already been renewed. Rosanna froze and repeated in a low voice, What did you say? She sprang to her feet and demanded angrily, Who would ever agree to guarantee a pawn shop like that? Hugo explained in a fluster, It's not just that pawn shop. Someone stepped forward to guarantee the entire street. Rosanna pressed, What do you mean? Taking a deep breath, Hugo said, Her Imperial Highness Princess, Katerina Priestliff, has announced that she will guarantee the entire street. Rosanna stood frozen, her eyes full of shock and fury. Just a few hours before the license renewal deadline, in a grand, brightly lit palace, a meeting on territorial administration was underway. Seated at the head of the long table, the regent asked, "How is the progress on the shop license renewals for Ashen Street?" One official looked at the records in his hand and reported about half the shops have found guarantors. The rest still have none. The regent instructed sternly, "Make sure that any shop that has not renewed its license today is not allowed to open tomorrow." The official answered respectfully, "As you command, Your Highness." Katerina, who had been quietly listening the whole time, then asked, "As long as they have a guarantor, they can renew their licenses, correct?" The regent turned to Katerina and answered, "Yes." Looking at the Katerina who had insisted on attending the meeting, he felt inwardly displeased. What exactly does she think she understands? Katerina said calmly, "In that case." Then in a clear voice that carried through the hall, she continued, "You may write down my name. Put Katerina's name in the guarantor column." At once, the meeting room erupted into noisy discussion. The regent slammed his hand down on the table and shouted, "This is outrageous. Katerina, this is not a place for your games." Katerina rose to her feet and looked at the regent calmly. "Uncle, if anyone has forgotten what kind of occasion this is, it is you." The regent glared at her. "What did you just say?" Katerina met his eyes and said, "Please use the proper form of address. I am Princess Katerina. That is my title." Sunlight spilled across the street as the door of a shop opened. "Emma, did you hear? Her Imperial Highness Princess Katerina has agreed to act as guarantor for every shop on Ashen Street." Looking at Eliza across from her, Emma exclaimed, "That's wonderful, isn't it?" Eliza smiled and replied, "Yes, I'm relieved no shops had to close because of it." Looking out the window, Eliza thought, so that's what he meant last night when he said, "You'll understand tonight." But how did he manage to do it? Emma asked in confusion. What made Princess Katerina decide something like that? Eliza looked away and answered, "Who knows?" Privately, Eliza wondered, it's only a guess, but could it really have been because of me? Emma suddenly seemed to remember something and clapped her hands. "Oh, right. Didn't you ask me earlier to track down a mage?" Eliza immediately asked, "Yes, did you find them?" Standing at the counter, Emma explained, "I can't be completely sure yet, but a friend of mine said that formula looked very familiar." Eliza let out a sigh of relief. "That's great. I was really worried you wouldn't be able to find them." Just then, the bell on the shop door rang, and a customer walked in. Eliza looked toward the door and greeted them. "Ah, welcome." Seeing that, Emma prepared to leave. "I'll be going first." Eliza waved goodbye. "See you later." Emma thought silently to herself, if she's that excited about it. Resting her chin on her hand, Emma fell into thought. Could Rosanna like that mage? Then she suddenly stopped. Wait, but that mage is a girl. Emma fell into a long silence. Then she smiled in acceptance. Well, girls can like girls too. It seems my previous view of mages really was too narrow-minded. After seeing off the last customer, Eliza said, "Thank you for coming. Please visit again." Looking at the empty doorway, she felt a trace of regret. It would have been better if I could find that mage first. After all, there's no evidence more useful for exposing Rosanna's crimes than that mage's testimony. Lowering her head, Eliza began organizing the leather satchel and documents on the desk. Slinging the satchel over her shoulder, she thought, even if I can't find her, it doesn't matter. Rosanna has plenty of people under her who've been exploited by her. Eliza walked to the door and flipped the sign from open to closed. Then she pushed the door open and stepped outside, her expression hardening. "If you dare lay a hand on my people, then I'll take away everyone who belongs to you." With the sound of the shop door shutting, the businesses of Ashen Street ended another busy day. Night fell, and moonlight covered the quiet estate. In a small house, tucked away in a remote corner of the manor, the lights were still on. The room was piled high with all kinds of paintings. Nicholas sat before an easel, palette and brush in hand. His face was full of anxiety, fine beads of sweat covering his forehead as he kept painting the canvas. Nicholas muttered under his breath, "This replica has to be finished before next week." Looking around at the room full of paintings, he thought, all of these have to be finished before next month. The brush in his hand stopped in midair, then slipped from his fingers and fell onto the thick carpet. Covering his face, Nicholas tried to focus. "If I miss the deadline, Rosanna will be furious." But painting has no joy left in it at all. At that moment, a woman's voice came from behind him. What a masterpiece. Nicholas turned around in fright. Who's there? Sometime without his noticing, Eliza had appeared behind him and was now gazing at the painting on the easel. Looking at the woman before him, Nicholas was filled with confusion. How'd she get in here? Eliza smiled and said, "Oh, sorry. Your paintings are just so beautiful. I couldn't help being drawn over." Nicholas stared blankly at Eliza. How did she get in here? Looking at the young woman before him, his mind was full of doubt. No, maybe I'm seeing things. He lowered his head and looked at the unfinished work on the easel. This one isn't my work. It's only a copy. Eliza lifted her hand and pointed to a painted plate nearby. I'm talking about the one on the plate. In the corner of the room sat an exquisite plate painted with a vibrant forest and waterfall, its colors bright and pure. Looking at the plate, Nicholas's eyes gradually grew wet. Yes, when I painted that plate, I was really happy. Unable to suppress the grievance in his heart any longer, tears spilled from his eyes. His voice trembled as he said, "I'm sorry you had to see me like this." Eliza walked over to Nicholas and looked at the man crushed. Under immense pressure, Nicholas wiped away his tears. He apologized softly. Eliza answered gently, "It's all right, Lord Nicholas. Thanks to you, I was able to admire such a wonderful work of art." Nicholas froze. Looking at the young woman before him, he asked, "You know who I am?" Nicholas thought to himself, "So she's neither a hallucination nor a ghost." Eliza smiled and replied, "Of course. And I think you know my grandfather as well." Nicholas repeated in confusion, "Your grandfather?" Eliza gave a small bow. "It's a pleasure to meet you, sir. My name is Eliza." As she spoke, she reached into her leather satchel. Eliza continued, "Duke Michel sent me." From the bag, she pulled out a stack of documents and handed them over. "These were listed for me in his will." Nicholas took the papers and lowered his head to read them carefully. Nicholas had been born a commoner, a painter of remarkable talent. Unfortunately, he had caught Rosanna's eye and become her son-in-law. By marrying this unknown genius, Rosanna had successfully fashioned herself into an elegant patron of the arts. In private, however, she treated Nicholas as nothing more than a tool for producing forgeries. No matter how Nicholas himself felt about it, Rosanna had never loved him. In her eyes, Nicholas was only a disposable tool. A sinister smile even crossed her face in the shadows. In Eliza's previous life, Rosanna eventually murdered Nicholas. It had been on a bitterly cold night. A carriage had overturned beneath a cliff in the wilderness, its shattered wreckage strewn everywhere. Perhaps because Rosanna's scandals had been so overwhelming, Nicholas's death had occupied only a tiny corner of the newspaper at the time. Standing in the street, Eliza had read the old paper and the notice of his death. The irony was that only after Nicholas died did his paintings truly begin to gain popularity and become sought after. Back in the little house in the present, Nicholas looked at the documents in his hand and asked in confusion, "I don't understand. Why would His Grace want to find me?" Eliza smiled at him and answered firmly, "He said he wants to invest in your talent." Nicholas froze, the papers trembling slightly in his hands. In disbelief, he repeated, "Invest in me?" Eliza answered with certainty, "Yes." Looking at the dark, heavy imitations on the easel, she continued, "Not in these copies." Eliza turned, her gaze falling on that vivid plate, painting full of life and color. Softly, she said, "But in your true work, Lord Nicholas." Nicholas stood there stunned, tears welling in his eyes. He stared blankly at the young woman before him. This was the first time anyone had ever told him they wanted to invest in those heartfelt creations of his that everyone else considered useless.